Hey, sweethearts, we're
Hello,
here.
everyone,
Hey, it's Susan Pierce Thompson here
and
with
Everett
my
Considine.
dear friend Everett Considine. All right, welcome everyone. Okay, Rosemary's here from the UK, Marie from Cape Canaveral, Florida. Susan says hello. Linda says hello from Connecticut. Um, Linda from Belvedere, Illinois. Tina from Bethany, New York. Shelley from Pennsylvania. She says she's excited to watch for the third time. Everett. Shelley,
We'll
that's
change it up a little for you.
but that's hardcore, girlfriend. You get the
Yeah.
hardcore prize. Like a 4-hour masterclass for the third time in a week. That's awesome. Deborah from Taylorville, Utah. Bonnie Esther from Massachusetts. Hey, Bonnie Esther. Good to see you, sweetie. Um, Jackie from Fresno, she says it's gorgeous today. Oh, I'm jealous. It's kind of dreary here, but that's all right. I'm home all day anyway. Um, let's see. Karen from Columbus, Ohio. We've got gratitude coming at us from Miriam in South Portland, Maine. She says, stay well. Leanne from Kansas, Sue from Cincinnati, Lori from the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia. Gorgeous. Roberta from Lake Tahoe. Awesome. Jewel Petey from Dripping Springs, Texas. Love it. Edward from Connecticut. Hey, Edward. That's the first male name I've seen in the list so far.
Yay, another man. Hi.
Monica from San Jose. Jessa says, let's get this party started. Yeah, maybe we should go ahead and do that. Doreen in Hartford. Oh, we've got a really fast thread coming in. Lex from Daytona Beach. All right. Manon from Quebec. Beautiful. All right. Let's see here. All right. I'm going to go ahead. Susan says, hello from inside. That's funny. Oh, are you inside the house too? Oh, hello from inside.
Hello from inside.
That's really funny. Diane from San Francisco. Oh, I wish I were in San Francisco right now. Beautiful. All right. Maria from Rochester, New York. Hey there. Right around the hood here. Okay. Hello, our beloveds. I'm going to go ahead and mute the chat thread. We will unmute it at the end when we do our extended Q&A. I always give my little spiel about why I mute the chat thread. I'm not just being mean. I'm actually being kind. You know, research shows that when you multitask, you don't enjoy yourself as well. So it's not only that you can't actually read a chat thread and hear verbal spoken language and process them both at the same time, which you can't. So in that way, the chat thread is obstructionist when what you're trying to absorb is coming at you verbally. But also research shows that you don't enjoy the experience if your attention is divided and you're having to task switch all the time. It becomes not fun. So we want to have fun. So I just muted the chat thread and we will go ahead and unmute it toward the end when we do our Q&A. Welcome to the third and final showing of our, what I'm now calling, I don't know if you know this, Everett, I started calling it a half-day masterclass.
I was like, that's more accurate
Yeah, exactly.
than a webinar,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, yeah.
It's like a woefully too long webinar, or it's a slamming half-day masterclass, right? Totally. So it's all a copy issue, right? That's what my friend says. It's all in the copy. It's just the words that you use to describe it make all the difference. So I want to introduce you to Everett Considine and to parts work. We're going to start off talking about parts work, and Everett holds a very central and near and dear place in my heart and in the Bright Line Eating movement history. I first made his acquaintance in 2015 through Lyndon Morris Del Rio, who was in the very first Bright Line Eating Bootcamp and is now the head of our online support community. And Lyndon was working with Everett in 2015 and had been for a while. And she just kept telling me sweetly, non-insistently, like, Susan, you really need to get to know Everett Considine. And I was too busy to pay any heed. But then I needed some support myself, and I remembered Lyndon's descriptions of the kind of work he does. So I reached out to him, and he did some very powerful work with me. At the time, it was work around I was really struggling around where do I get my support. I have, as you know, I think a really bad case of food addiction, right? It's really bad. And I was starting to struggle with my food again because I had left the 12-step support structure that I was in, but I was still struggling trying to figure out how to plug in from the bottom in Bright Line Eating while I also was building and holding the structure from the top. And it just kind of felt like a mess. And so I reached out to Everett, and he did some really powerful work with me that helped me understand the part of me that wanted to retreat back to that 12-step structure. I thought it was a very strong warrior princess kind of part of me, and it turned out that it was a very ill-formed, rubbery little scared, weak little girl that was huddled in the corner that just wanted not to hurt with the food anymore, really just wanted someone strong and clear with rules and an authoritarian approach to come tell me what to eat, really. And it was really interesting to see that, because I thought, I didn't think that that's what that part of me was like at all. And it really created a powerful shift for me at a pivotal juncture in my own food journey. So after that, I kept sending him people. I just kept sending him people. And he basically, his private practice, he's been working with people doing parts work for a long time. His private practice got flooded and then just essentially completely taken over by Bright Lifers and people doing Bright Line Eating. And that gave him, he used some language in the first time we did this webinar that I love. It's about, developing expertise, right? It's one thing to be good at something or to have training in it, but there's another thing that happens when you just see so many instances over so many years that you come to know the patterns really deeply, and the breadth and scope of them and all the ways that they vary and all the ways that they're similar, and the patterns start to extract. That's what I have now working with people with food addiction. That's why sometimes, people from my coaching staff come to me and they're like, Susan, what about this? And because I have just more experience, right? I'm able to help. So Everett started to build up that level of expertise, right? He said something like an eye surgeon who just does eye surgeries all day, every day. And he built up this expertise with the parts of us that become activated when we do Bright Line Eating on a food journey. And then we started this course, Bright Line Freedom, together. And now this is another course that we're co-creating together. Today in this webinar, we're going to talk about the parts of us that get active during a crisis, during a time of extreme uncertainty, because that's what we've got going on right now. And the other thing about Everett is that he's an innovator, like I am. He's a creator, and he's an instructor. He creates new frameworks and is good at teaching them to people. And he's created a framework around the parts that get activated during crisis, the crisis response system in the body and the psyche. And I'm going to be sharing later the neuroscience underlying what he's talking about. And then we're going to talk about our new course, which has been renamed Bright Line Grit, Calm and Bright Through Crisis. I don't know if the vlog is out yet, but I shot the vlog, and I'll tell you why we're renaming the course. That's a cool story. But yeah, we have a new course, and registration ends tomorrow, and the course starts tomorrow with a kickoff call at 3 p.m. Eastern with me. And Everett and I are co-teaching this course. It's the first time we've co-taught a course, which is exciting as well. So without further ado, I just want to introduce Everett Considine to share a little bit more about his story with Bright Line Eating from his perspective. Take it away, Everett.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is I am so grateful to Bright Line Eating. Like, I am in a right-sized body, and before I discovered Bright Line Eating, 5 years ago, I'd really given up on that. I'd just given up on it. I just realized, I just thought, well, I'm in my 50s. It must be my hormones. It must be my metabolism. Like, I can never keep it off if I had given up on it. And through the various synchronicities of meeting Lyndon, getting introduced to Susan, and then getting introduced to Brightline Eating, I've been on my own journey around food. And it's a little different in that I didn't come out of the 12-step food addiction world, wasn't like a big binger. In fact, my first few years of doing Brightline Eating, I just did it about 90% and lost about 40 pounds, and I called it almost BLE, and that really worked for me. And we all find our own way with Brightline Eating, and but the number of my practice, basically what I do now is I work full time doing parts work with Brightline Eating folks, and then teach parts work courses to Brightline Eating folks. So I have got like such a depth of understanding around what's going on inside of us on this journey. And I've made some really significant breakthroughs myself. Like I was able to take off that last 20 pounds. And that's what I did in the last, I think it's been 4 months, once I unraveled like why I was stuck, got really curious about it, and then evolved this whole framework. Like Susan says, I like to create frameworks called finish line anxiety, and started to see how my being stalled, my being stuck, was because on a deep level, I was freaked out about actually getting to goal weight. And there were a variety of reasons for that I won't go into here. But the first few years of working with Brightline Eating, I evolved something we called a BLE parts map, and we created Brightline Freedom, and we created the cast of characters that are inside each of us on our Brightline Eating journey. And and the thing about parts work, if you're new to it, is it'll, as soon as you hear it, you understand it and start using it. It's quite amazing how, since we really do have lots of different parts inside of us, it's very easy to start thinking of yourself in that way. And so my first few years with Brightline Eating was just doing lots of one-on-one work. Susan and I developed Brightline Freedom, and started to teach. I do something called internal family systems. We call it parts work here because we've kind of changed it up a bit. And yeah, if you're struggling with your food, it's usually because there's inner work to do, and it's not optional, even though we want it to be optional. And I don't know that maybe, well, I guess if you're not struggling, then maybe you don't have it to do, right? But really, to be on a journey of getting a really healthy relationship with food, most of us need a framework or a tool set to do inner work. And that's what we're going to be presenting to you here, is how we do the inner work in Brightline Eating. And it's ever evolving. This combination of Brightline Eating and IFS and parts work seems to be like a magic bullet almost. It seems to be that, having the really intense support around your food and a plan that works, and then a way to do the inner work, is like this 1-2 punch that will allow you to really settle into Brightline Eating in a way that it'll become effortless for you eventually. And since I've done this talk 3 times, I'm trying to just not say the same thing I say every time. And Susan introduced me so well. I think that's enough for now, Susan. Why don't you do the history of parts work?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it. Let's get going. So we are going to talk about parts, and Everett's going to talk about parts. He just talked about a cast of characters. And I think it's important, especially those who are new to the framework. I think it's important to kind of lay out for you why you should believe in that, right? Why you should believe that we each have a little cast of characters inside of us that's, each of them has their own set of needs, their own agenda, their own desires, their own kind of thing that they're lobbying for or that they want or whatever. And that learning them and learning how to work with them is really the linchpin to doing your inner work and to getting really free and peaceful on your food journey. Why should you believe that? I think for some people that starts to feel uncomfortable almost, like it sounds a little far-fetched or even a little like smacking of mental illness. Like, what are you saying exactly, right? So, if you know my background, I was a psychology professor for many years. And really, that was my whole life before I started this Bright Line Eating thing. I was a tenured psychology professor at the time. I still have an academic appointment in the Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences at the University of Rochester. And I love teaching. And I taught Psych 101, and I love teaching Psych 101. I also taught Introduction to Brain and Cognitive Science, and I love teaching that. The reason I like teaching the intro courses is because it's just a best of the best of. There's no time to teach anything lame or not really revolutionary. And what I'm about to share with you today is really revolutionary. This is the really, I think, one of the biggest revolutions that's happening in the world of psychology on the clinical side, like in terms of like how you actually help people get well, get healthy, do their inner work, right? So let me launch into it. I'm going to share with you a presentation that I've put together called A Brief History of Parts Work. A brief history of parts work. Why should you care? Why should you believe in this? Doesn't this sound a little, a little balmy maybe? Let's talk about it. Okay. Most of the history that I'm going to present to you comes from this book. If you want a more thorough exposition of the subject, this would be the source to go to. A 2017 book by Richard Schwartz, who I'm going to introduce you to at the end of this lecture, called Many Minds, One Self. And the question in this little part of our half-day masterclass here in this subset, this section, is none other than the massive, critical philosophical question of who are we really? What is the nature of a human being? And if I have you ask yourself, who am I? What you will probably discover is that you believe something that we could call the mono-mind view, the one mind view, the unified mind view. Who am I? Well, I'm me. What do you mean by that? I'm me. I'm a person. I'm one person. I have one mind. I am undivided. I have free will. You would realize that that's what you kind of believe. And in today's society, the mono-mind view is both ubiquitous and naturally assumed. And we never question whether it's true. And we never question whether it's helpful. Like, what's the utility of that construct? Does it help us? According to the mono-mind view, if someone has competing parts operating inside of them, something's wrong. In particular, they're mentally ill, clinically so. And a series of movies that came out in the 1950s and up into the 1970s, a couple of these won Academy Awards or were nominated for Academy Awards, very prominent movies, depicted women with multiple personality disorder in very striking and disturbing terms. And those movies had a huge impact on shaping our collective consciousness around the idea of us having parts inside of us, and really framed it as mental illness. And a lot of therapists still are under the impression that if you have PARTS, that's a mental illness, because patients with strong active PARTS who present in therapy nearly always report having been severely abused. And the PARTS create deviant and distressing symptoms. And so the assumption of many therapists is that a healthy mind is unitary and an unhealthy mind has PARTS. Now, as we'll see, I'll mention this a little bit later, but I feel like saying it now, so I will. We all have PARTS, they're just not this strong. They're not creating as much trouble usually. However, those of us with food issues often do have a war going on between a food indulger part and a food controller part. The food indulger part's the part that wants us to eat. The food controller part is the part that wants us to stick to our bright lines and keep it together. And for many of us, that war is very obvious. And it would be an instance of strong active PARTS. I would argue it's not an instance of mental illness. It's why we need to be thinking of ourselves as having PARTS, even the sort of mentally healthy, right? Now, multiple personality disorder, just a note, was renamed dissociative identity disorder in 1994 when the DSM-4 came out. So the trouble with the monomind view that we're all unitary inside of ourselves is that it doesn't work very well. It really doesn't. It leaves us feeling stuck. It leaves us feeling at war with ourselves. We end up wondering why we can't pull it together, why we keep acting out of our own best interests when we know better. If it's all one person in there, then what's the deal? Why do we keep doing it when, doing this when we know we shouldn't, or not doing it when we know we should, or, why are we always fighting with ourselves, right? It's just a big muddled confusion until you separate out the different parts and what they actually believe and what they're actually lobbying for. So with the monomind view in control, or, sort of running in the background as the operating system that we're assuming that we are operating from, when you're believing that, what happens is then you're just watching yourself act against your own highest good. And you're just watching that all the time. Like, here I am, not doing what I wish I were doing what I wish I weren't doing again. And then, you watch yourself have fears and self-judgments and talk nasty to yourself inside your own head, and all these different emotions and thoughts that keep us from being who we want to be. And it's all just jumbled up. And so what we do, well, maybe we hide or ignore it, or just go eat or drink or smoke or whatever to numb it out. But more often we work on it. We wrestle with ourselves. We go to therapy. We learn to meditate. We try harder. But it just feels like Sisyphus pushing the darn boulder up the mountain, because again and again and again, we're stuck in the same struggles. And if we're food addicts, right, we're just still eating when we wish we weren't eating. But it's more helpful to think of it this way: the food indulger part and the food controller part. That's what's really going on inside of us. Then a crisis happens and anxiety ratchets up, overwhelm ratchets up, stress ratchets up, and now a whole new parts landscape exists. Now, I want to say that there is another way, and the purpose of this lecture is to invite you to take a second look at who you really are deep down inside. Who are you really? I want to present to you a different paradigm that's more useful and more true to your lived experience. And like Everett said, it's going to resonate with you because it's just so true to your lived experience, right? We all have these parts, and once we're introduced to them, it just makes so much sense. And then when you start to learn how to work with them, then the magic happens. So here's a brain, and the reality is that the brain is not one mind, it's many minds. That's it. The paradigm in a nutshell. The self is not one, but many. We have parts. So that's what this lecture is aiming to convince you of, that it behooves you at least to consider the possibility, to try it on. You've probably been operating from the monomind view for a long time, and I invite you to consider that there are multiple sort of consciousnesses inside of you. I want you to think of them sort of as systems of consciousness inside of you, that or just parts, and it can be really helpful to anthropomorphize them and make them sort of into little people or little characters, and then you can really work with them really easily. Now, the history of this parts perspective, this multiple self perspective, it's a minority view in history, but I think you'll see not a weak minority view. It's a very, very strong minority view. The first written record of the many minds concept comes from an ancient Egyptian text. We don't have a lot of writing from before this, so this goes all the way back, essentially. And in this text, a man is arguing with his own Ba, or soul. And it's a really fascinating text, because what's happening in it is the man wants to commit suicide, and his Ba, or soul, is saying no. And they have a dialogue about it. And it's really cute, because the soul is really like, no, we can't kill yourself. And the man is like, please. And the soul's like, no. And then the man's like, pretty please. And the soul's like, no. And then the man's like, but I'll make sure that we'll have a really good burial with all the good stuff buried with us. Like, I'll make sure that all the things are in our tomb. And the soul is like, no. And at the end of the text, the soul says, we have discussed this and come to a resolution. I'm glad we have at least made peace with each other. And there's like this anyway, and this man's like fighting with himself. So yeah, that is the first instance in written history of the many minds concept. I think it's kind of delightful. The soul's like, no, still no. Okay, Socrates wins. As always, Socrates is the man. Socrates wins the many minds argument in terms of just the simplicity of philosophical beauty. It's just, yeah. So Socrates believed firmly that the mind is multiple, and he found the most pithy way to express it. He said, one mind cannot both want and not want at the same time. Therefore, we are all at least dual. Therefore, the mind must be at least dual. One mind cannot both want and not want all the time, but we do all the time, right? All the time. Yeah, I mean, all the time. Like, a day is a series of that, right? I both want to get out of bed to exercise, and I don't want to get out of bed to exercise at the same time. Oh, I mean, it just goes on and on. Socrates believed in multiple minds. Plato believed in multiple minds. Aristotle believed in multiple minds. And then the Bible writes about parts and multiple selves. So does Friedrich Nietzsche. So does William James, the founder of psychology in America. So did Sigmund Freud. So did Carl Jung. As you can see, a minority view, but not really. Right? If you think about the deep thinkers that came to the conclusion that the mind is not unitary, it is really not. And then if you go around the world and you look at indigenous cultures that evolved their own concept of many minds without exposure to other societies or Western thought or anything like that, the Fijians, the Algonquins, and the Karens all believe that there are two souls or selves within all of us. The Chuchi, Ashanti, Yukagir, and Dahomey believe there are three. The Dakotas believe there are four. And the Malays believe there are seven. So again, really interesting that this notion seems to be discovered, and it seems to emerge independently all the time, all around the world. In essence, essentially from ancient times through the Renaissance until the modern day, the mind's multiplicity has been discovered, lost, discovered, lost, discovered, and lost again, over and over and over. Now, I want to emphasize the Renaissance here, because it was really during the Renaissance, around the 1500s, that the pathologicalization of the many minds concept took root. And this is where it really got squelched with a fear base that kept it a minority view. And it just became hard to get mainstream society to shake the notion that there was something wrong with you if you had parts. And the zeitgeist, or the ethos of that time, if you think 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, during those centuries, in many different parts of the world, there was an emerging fear base around witchcraft, around what probably was schizophrenia, honestly, which 1% of the population suffer from, where you hear voices and have delusions and hallucinations. And societies emerged ways of handling instances of mental illness like that, which they didn't know was mental illness. And they were scary, right? Like burn them at the stake. Or like the Germanic tribes used to bound someone up with ropes and throw them in the river. And the river was a symbol of purification. And if it accepted them, then they were pure and they were okay. But of course, then they drowned. If they floated and the river rejected them, then they needed to be burned at the stake. And treatment like this of people who exhibited the symptoms of schizophrenia, which are different than multiple personality disorder, certainly different than a healthy mind having normal parts, right? The separate systems of consciousness that we all have. The treatment of such people was so extreme that it was just too scary to talk about parts or to theorize in that direction at all. And the Salem witch trials, and on, right? So this is one of the big reasons that the parts perspective really got squelched, is that it got pathologized and it got locked into that box and just never let out. So that's some of the history. I want to go over what neuroscience says, because that's something I really care about, right? Like, we now have a fairly robust study of consciousness in the brain. It's still a mystery. Like, the actual magical point where matter becomes mind is a mystery. We don't know how consciousness emerges, but we do know a fair bit about consciousness from various studies that have been done. And neuroscience actually weighs in extremely strongly on this point, whether we have one mind, like one unified consciousness system in the brain, one system of consciousness across the entire cortex, or whether we have separate systems of consciousness that emerge in different parts of the brain and can coexist simultaneously. Neuroscience is actually clear on that. And the first research toward this was done in the 1950s and 60s for a whole other reason. They were basically trying to deal with patients who were presenting with severe epilepsy, like really bad, grand mal seizures multiple times a day, couldn't function, certainly couldn't drive a car, could barely leave the house, because the next grand mal seizure was, minutes away. Grand mal seizures tend to arise out of a particular portion of the brain. They then spread. And so, if there was a big portion of the brain that wasn't yet beset by seizures, you wanted to protect it. And for that reason, they would literally split the brain in two. If seizures were localized in one hemisphere, you wanted to keep the other hemisphere safe. They would cut the corpus callosum, which is this super highway bundle of nerve fibers here in the center of the brain that connects the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And it's not the only connection, but it's almost all of the connection between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Essentially, once it's severed, and they would sever everything basically between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and create two separate brains, two separate minds. And then it turns out that they have, instead of like dividing the brain in half and having kind of, Joe in the left and Joe in the right. I think it was all men that got this surgery. Joe in the left and Joe in the right. That's not what they had. They had like, Jekyll in one half and Hyde in the other. So it turns out that the left hemisphere is really happy and the right hemisphere is extremely depressive, almost to the point of being suicidal if left alone without any ability to, check in with the left hemisphere. They're very, very different, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Further research showed that the left hemisphere has this propensity to spin up cockamamie stories about what it thinks is going on or what it thinks it just did, basically. And you could do this by making the right hemisphere do something, like, say, move something with the left hand. And then the left hemisphere would make up a story about why it had just done that. Like it itself had just done that. It's like, you didn't do that. The right hemisphere did that. But the left hemisphere would go, oh no, I did. I remember choosing to do that. And you're like, you didn't. I gave the instruction to the right hemisphere. You had no access to that information. And the left hemisphere is like, yes, no, I remember choosing to do that. And here's why. I was thinking this. It's like, dude, you're so full of it. That is not what happened. So this is the part of the brain that spins a story after we eat about why we did it. It's, in extreme cases, the part of the brain that spins the story in the, the person beating their spouse about why they did it, right? Like, well, this, that, and the other. It's like, well, that the left hemisphere will confabulate. It'll just make up any errant nonsense to justify what's already happened. So anyway, I got to ask this guy right here. This is Michael Gazzaniga, the preeminent neuroscientist in the entire world. I got to ask him, what are you thinking these days about consciousness? What does the latest research show? This was maybe 10 years ago. He gave a talk at the University of Rochester. I was blessed enough to be there, and I got to talk with him afterwards. And he basically looked at me and he said, the most exciting neuroscience right now is around this idea right here. We have moved toward the idea of a plethora of consciousness systems of consciousness, systems of separate minds in the brain. We no longer think of the brain as being organized into just two conscious systems at all, referring to his left brain, right brain work with the split brain patients, right? But now we're thinking, actually, the brain is separated and organized into multiple dynamic, meaning at the same time, all happening in concert together, mental systems. Separate systems of consciousness is what we have in the brain. Essentially, the latest research shows that the tissue of brain cortex, neocortex, creates consciousness in a localized way. So that the part of the brain that's executing whatever it is, visual cortex is helping you see red, but it's also giving you the phenomenological experience of what it feels like to see red. And motor cortex is helping you raise your hand to say, hey, teacher, can I go to the bathroom? But it's also giving you the feeling of what it feels like to stick your hand in the air. And then the left hemisphere that speaks is giving you the experience of speaking, hey, can I go to the bathroom? The limbic system is creating the emotions around that. It's all happening, and it's not a unified experience. It's all localized. The other main line of evidence that I think is fascinating comes from artificial intelligence, actually, from the words of Marvin Minsky, co-founder of MIT's Artificial Intelligence Lab, where this was really the hotbed of robotics and artificial intelligence starting in the 1950s and 60s. And Marvin Minsky's been there the whole time. And what he said is a unitary computer program can't mimic any form of intelligence. Intelligence comes from multiple systems, from parts. He said, what's needed are parts, many specialized agents for different jobs. When we join these agents together in societies in certain very special ways, this leads to intelligence. Intelligence cannot be unitary. That's not the way it works. So how did this get discovered in modern psychology? Well, there was an evolution to this. Before we get to Dick Schwartz here, I just want to say there was a lot of work that happened with the Gestalt movement in Germany in the 1960s. Fritz Perls did the empty chair technique, where he would do group therapy, and he would put an empty chair in the room, and he would have someone basically put their emotion in that chair, and he would say, "Put your anger there. Speak from your anger. What is your anger saying?" And it would people would start to anthropomorphize their emotions in that way. Then another big development happened in the late 70s and all through the 80s with the birth of adult children of alcoholics, and the series of books written on the wounded inner child. The inner child movement, the inner child is one of our parts, and it's a part that people can instantly relate to. Oh yeah, I have a wounded inner child for sure, like everybody does, right? And it's a part that we can relate to deep inside of us, a wounded inner kid in there, a wounded child. And the wounded child movement in the 1980s was the first real mainstream, like globally accepted articulation of parts. And then the sophisticated, nuanced, fleshed out version of parts work that Everett Considine is trained in was born with this man here, Richard Schwartz, in the early 1980s. He was at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He was a trained family systems therapist. So he was a therapist, and he was doing family systems therapy. So family systems therapy is like thinking about your patient in terms of their role in their family. Are they the oldest child, the youngest child? What role do they play within the family dynamic? Are they the scapegoat? Are they the peacekeeper? Are they the black sheep of the family? Are they the rebel? How do they operate within the family system? And Dick Schwartz was trying to do this work with bulimics, actually. And he did a clinical trial where he did all kinds of family systems therapy with bulimics, and then in this randomized clinical trial, looked to see how it worked, and it didn't. It just didn't. Like, their binging didn't go down at all. And he was stunned because he thought his therapy was so good. So his response to that was to get really curious and to start to interview the bulimics one-on-one about their binging episodes and their purging episodes. And the bulimics started to talk to Dick Schwartz about their binge part and their purge part and the part that didn't want them to, and started to talk about the dynamics and the fight, the war between those parts with such detail that Richard Schwartz became convinced that they had essentially a family system inside of them, a family system of parts. And the system became known as internal family systems, or IFS. That's where the name internal family systems comes from. The family systems of parts inside of us that's interacting with each other. And once Dick Schwartz started to do internal family systems with them, they started to get results. So from this internal family systems perspective, trauma doesn't actually create parts. It really doesn't. It just makes the parts we have more extreme and more separate from each other, kind of louder and more noticeable, enough that a therapist would be alarmed or concerned, and that, there might be a diagnosis of mental illness happening. But we all still have parts. They're just not as noticeable. As a matter of fact, with the assumption the healthy mind is multiple, but just harmonious, then you realize that the inner parts in a healthy mind don't stand out as much, and they can go unnoticed until you get trained to see them. As a matter of fact, what usually happens, what's happening for everyone until they encounter parts work, like they get taught by me or Everett or another IFS practitioner or something about their parts, is that they don't even notice their parts. What happens is we all have a calm, clear, highest self, And the highest self is characterized by 8 C's. You're in your highest self when you're calm, you're clear, you're centered, you're courageous, you're connected, you're curious. There's others, right? So you get the gist. When you're anything else, you're in a part. You're angry, you're agitated, you're bored, you're frustrated, you're whatever, right? You're turned on, you're whatever, right? Okay. Those are parts. And what happens for us usually is we just get blended with our parts. Like we're suddenly in a part, we don't even realize it, right? We're suddenly like really irritated or agitated or we're whatever, right? Those are parts. But you know, our mind is relatively harmonious, so we can slip into operating from the perspective of a part without even realizing it. And then a crisis happens, right? And then for many of us, you know, the anxious parts, the fearful parts really start to stand out. Now, you might still be blended with them and not even realize it. You might be going back to the store for the 48th can of beans, right? And it's like, you know, you don't even realize you're blended with your stockpiler part, you know. Or you might notice for a lot of people, the crisis is their food addiction, right? Or their weight problem. And then it starts to bring the food indulger to the forefront where you realize I keep eating and I don't want to be eating, right? So it might be anxiety or fear like this picture, or it might be eating, right? So this brings us up to the present day. This is me and Everett Considine at the first annual family reunion. And he's internal family systems certified. He also is a Bright Lifer. Like I said, he's been on his own Bright Line eating journey for many, many years. He's a member of our community, just like I am, just like we all are. And he's been working with our Bright Line eating community for a long time. And what he's going to do now is he's going to give us an introduction to this amazing new paradigm that he's innovated because of the coronavirus pandemic on the crisis and fear system, the parts system that gets activated in a time of crisis. And this is brand new work that he's pioneered, and it's the foundation of our new course, but he's going to lay out the framework for you right now and give you some really practical nuts and bolts of how you use this understanding to come back to your calm, centered self. So it is Everett's turn now. Now that you know why you should care about parts, because they're real and they're inside you.
Thank you.
Let's learn more about our parts. Let's see here. Let's get Everett big. And he's going to pull up his PowerPoint, and I am going to go away while he gives his lecture.
Yeah. And before I pull up the PowerPoint, I want to do just a brief grounding meditation with everyone. And I'll tell you why when we're done. And only do this if you're able, if it makes sense to where you are. If you're driving or don't meditate or whatever, just feel free to ignore it. But it'll just be a couple minutes. But I want to invite you, if you're able, to close your eyes and take a breath. And notice your thinking. Just notice what's on your mind. Notice your feelings and emotions. Notice your physical sensations. And feel the top of your head. Feel the muscles in your face. Relax your face. Relax your jaw. And relax all the little muscles around your eyes. And feel the back of your head and your neck and your shoulders and your chest. Just allow your breath to deepen And your shoulders to drop. Feel your upper back, your lower back. Feel your belly. Feel your upper arms, your elbows, your forearms, your wrists and your hands. And feel your hips and your pelvis, your thighs, your knees, your calves, your ankles, and your feet. And take a breath into your belly. Take a deeper breath into your belly. And take the deepest breath you can into your belly. Take a breath into your heart. Take a deeper breath into your heart. And take the deepest breath you can into your heart. And take a breath into your mind. Just focus on your forehead or your third eye as you breathe. Take a deeper breath into the mind. And take the deepest breath you can into the mind. Now feel your lower back. Feel your feet. And say your full name to yourself 3 times. Call yourself back into your body. So, as Susan talked about in internal family systems, something that's very central, a central concept and idea that usually really resonates with most people is that we all have an authentic self, that we all have a calm, clear center. And sometimes we're in our authentic self, and then, a lot of times we're not, right? Because protective parts of us or wounded parts of us have been activated. But if that meditation brought you into some calmness, if that meditation slowed you down, that means that you're moving more into your authentic self. And ultimately, parts work, even though we're very focused on parts work is actually about living more and more from your authentic self, living more and more from your centered self. And this course we're going to develop is all about staying in your centered self as you move through crisis. And so here, let me pull my slides up now. So one of the beautiful things about Bright Line Eating is, once you know the food program, right? Like it actually works. The weight loss plan works if you do it exactly the way it's prescribed. For almost everyone it'll work, and you can tweak it, and then it'll work for you. And then wouldn't it be great? Then you just do it, right? You just do it, and then the weight comes off. You get into your right size body. But of course, what happens for a lot of us is when we go to do Bright Line Eating, and we're able to do it, then suddenly we're noticing all these things that we were numbing before with our food. And some people have a trouble even doing bright line eating because the things that it's so hard to not numb the underlying stress with food. And so a lot of what Susan has been teaching for years about habit stacks and healthy routines, like bright line eating itself, the whole program, if you really adopt it, is a program that connects you more and more to your centered self. Before you even do parts work, if you really adopt the program, if you reach out and get buddies and support, if you start meditating in the morning, if you do your gratitude journal at night, the process of just doing BLE, the full program, moves you more and more into your centered self, right? And so a lot of people who are being successful with bright line eating have a lot of that in their life now. They have a lot of that centered self in their life because of all these amazing healthy routines that they have. You know, they started doing their inner work. But each of us is going to have one or more times in our life where suddenly something is going to happen that is going to feel like a crisis. Something is going to happen that's going to feel like a crisis. And if we're able to stay in our centered self, right? If we're able to stay in our centered self, then our calm, if we can stay in our calm rather than panicking, the centered self takes some deep breaths, stays grounded, and proceeds with a steady step and heart. I'm just going to go through these qualities of the centered self. And when we're in our centered self, we're confident. Instead of feeling like we cannot win or that we're weak or broken, the centered self knows that we already have everything we need within us to make it through high stress situations. The centered self is curious. When crisis sets in, the centered self gets curious and explores these feelings. The centered self looks for opportunities to manage the stress and learn something new from it. Feelings of the centered self is clear. Feelings of crisis could create so much static in our heads, but the centered self takes the time to cut through these distractions and confusions. The centered self adjusts perspective to see things as they are and to think clearly. The centered self is compassionate. Crisis feelings in parts can be combative, selfish, aggressive, and otherwise toxic. But the centered self recognizes the worth and humanity within ourselves and within others. The centered self pursues kindness and generosity instead of judgment and cruelty. The centered self is creative. Parts may experience tunnel vision when feeling in crisis. While that kind of stress and panic can close our scope of perspective, the centered self is open to new ideas and innovation. Creativity shows us new ways to work through the circumstances that trigger crisis. The centered self is courageous. When parts feel afraid, and especially when they want to give up, the centered self is ready to experience this fear and write it out. Courage isn't a lack of fear, it's the ability to face fear and keep going. The centered self is connected. When feelings of crisis make our parts want to isolate, either quietly or aggressively, the centered self knows that human connections are essential to our mental, emotional, and physical health. So, wouldn't that be nice if during crisis we could respond from our centered self, right? Now, the framework I'm going to take you through is probably what happens to you in crisis is protective parts get triggered that want to save the day, help you in a variety of ways, right? And so I'm going to define crisis in a specific way for this talk. A crisis is a fear-producing event that happens in your life. Could be a pandemic, could be a diagnosis with some disease, could be a death of someone close to you. Something that happens in your life that produces a lot of fear. And then your inner system, right, gets flooded with fear. And when your inner system gets flooded with fear, crisis response parts become activated and you move away from your centered self. Crisis response parts become activated and you move away from the centered self. Now, many times, these parts themselves compound the fear, making it deeper, bigger, or otherwise more overwhelming. And if we're not aware of this as it happens, we move deeper into overwhelm, deeper into overwhelm. When we listen to our fears from our centered self, we're able to act appropriately and effectively. However, when protective parts are triggered instead, we can find ourselves doing way too much or not enough, and then we find ourselves in a state of overwhelm. So what we do in parts work, right? So something happens in your life, you're flooded with fear. And then these protective parts show up to try and help you get through the situation. And in parts work, what we do is we notice what's happening inside of us. We notice the feelings, the sensations, the thoughts. And what we do is we personify those things in parts work. We anthropomorphize them. We turn them into little characters inside of us that we can relate to. We give identities and images to our inner experiences in order to make them clearer and importantly to empathize with them. This also allows you to externalize those things, right? This also externalizes the inner experiences in a way that allows us to stay more centered. Our thoughts and feelings aren't me, they are parts that exist in the psyche. And this is something that happens right away with people when they start to relate to themselves as parts, right? Like, you know, you might have really an angry, raging part that flies off the handle and yells at your kids or your husband, right? And you may have another part that feels a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of regret. And when you start to notice that, oh, that's just a part of me. It's just a part of me. That's not all of me. That's just a part of me. There's this immediate moving into your center, and it's actually more accurate. It's more accurate to say a part of me is angry than to say I'm angry, right? Because usually there's multiple parts inside of there. So to stay centered, we separate or distinguish ourselves from our inner experiences, parts, thoughts, and feelings, so that we may think and feel more clearly and effectively. And what I want you to notice is we're not repressing them. Right? We're not, I mean, that's another strategy. Just repress all your feelings and try and be calm, right? We're not repressing. In fact, we're doing the opposite in that we're bringing awareness to them, and then we're bringing loving attention to them. And it's really, I was reflecting on this morning, that it's really the combination of self-awareness and self-compassion is really what this way of relating to yourself and doing your inner work provides. And if you have self-awareness, then you can actually go inside and see what's going on And if you have self-compassion, you can do it from a non-critical place, right? Many of us are able to critically evaluate ourselves, and that just feels kind of horrible, right? But when you can compassionately evaluate what's going on, it creates a possibility for change, and that's really what parts work facilitates, is pretty rapid transformation. And as you get to know these parts and work with these parts, and start to not be controlled by them anymore. So these are the crisis response parts, and I'm sure there are more. Susan came up with a couple more the first time I went through this list, and I'll add those at some point. And so the first one I have is, I call it the horribilizer, right? And the horribilizer basically takes the fear of what could happen and projects out worst case scenarios. Worst case scenarios. In other words, what are the most horrible outcomes from whatever it is that you're dealing with? And in fact, maybe Susan will speak to it later, that we did a little bit of parts work with around when I was presenting this stuff to her, and she found her horribilizer right away and did some work with him, and I'll let her tell that story a little bit later. But the horribilizer is a part. Now, is it useful to realize that your horribilizer part has been activated? Yeah, right, because that gives you the opportunity to work with that part, get to know that part, maybe even simply take a breath, come back to center, and unblend from that part. The isolator, right? The isolator distances us from others. And as I go through these crisis response parts, I want to invite you to notice which ones you have. Do you have a horribilizer? Do you have an isolator? The caretaker, right? A part that comes up that suddenly gets very codependently fixated on taking care of everyone else, usually to the exclusion of themselves. That's what makes it unhealthy. The caretaker. The hero, a part that jumps up and wants to save the day, right? Again, becoming the savior, or maybe even the martyr, right? And again, that's great to have a hero part that jumps up to save the day, right? As long as people want to be saved, or too many heroes aren't jumping up at the same time with different plans and all fighting. The dictator, a part that shows up and is suddenly very controlling of everything and everyone. I always have an image of a mother barking orders at her kids and her family, right? When this part becomes activated. And maybe that was because of my mom did that. I hadn't really thought, why is that image so strong? The stockpiler, right, over prepares for a crisis. When I was coming up with these list of characters, because of the pandemic, all I had to do was think about all the different ways people are responding to the pandemic, right? And the stockpiler, right? No toilet paper, right? Those are people's stockpilers, over preparing for crisis. I have another form of the stockpiler where I over prepare some not so much like for the end of the world, but for unknown things that could happen. I did a vision quest with a shamanic community I'm a part of a few years, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And I so over prepared for that. That's yeah. So the accountant analyzes and tracks everything. right? Do you have a part that just comes up and is suddenly watching and tracking everything? The lookout is scanning the environment for danger, hypervigilance, right? The lookout is scanning the present environment for danger. The burrower, right, hides from a situation, climbs under those covers, head in the sand, right? But the burrower just burrows into something to just be warm and held and away from danger. The minimizer, right, downplays the danger or importance of whatever's happening, right? A lot of us, I tend to be, when my crisis response tend to be more on the minimizing, denying, cloud gazing side of things, right? Until the evidence is overwhelming. And a lot of us went through that with this pandemic in terms of not really believing that it was as bad as it was until the evidence was just overwhelming. But the minimizer downplays the danger or importance. And of course, the problem with the minimizer doing that is you might not get the real lesson from the fear. There might be things that you should be doing that you're not doing because you're minimizing it. The cloud gazer, right? Someone that reframes the situation as a positive, right? This is the world of spiritual platitudes and, oh, just be grateful for this horrible thing that's happening. And, and it's good to be reminded of those perspectives, right? But again, if you're not able to see the seriousness of something, you might not respond to it appropriately, right? The denier just denies that anything is wrong, right? Denial is such a powerful part of the psyche. It allows us to, I think it's like a circuit breaker for overwhelm, right? Like if really acknowledging something is going to be so too overwhelming, the denier comes in and just erases it. It's like, you know what? Better that you don't even know this thing exists than you're completely debilitated by fear or despair because of it, right? Um, I respect denial. Like when that protector shows up, there's a reason that it's there. Um, but again, if you're in denial, then you can't, and we've all seen this, right? With people in our lives or people we know of, people, dying of lung cancer who can't quit smoking, right? Like, things that are so obvious from the outside, but again, this part, the denier, is really powerful in the human psyche. The paranoiac, right? A lot of conspiracy theories and stories popping up right now, alternative narratives to the mainstream narrative. So a part that invents stories of conspiracy or, doesn't trust what's being told, right? Again, another kind of part. Um, the exterminator, a part that just wants to eradicate the problem, right? And then, of course, the indulger, which is a crisis response part that probably everyone on this call has. And food, the pleasure of eating, is a really fast, simple way to distract from underlying stress or anxiety. It's and this culture has just made it infinitely easy to have all this really super highly palatable, addictive food available at everywhere at an arm's reach, right? So the indulger, and then one of the parts that Susan talked about was the news hound, right? The news hound, right? Who can't stop reading the news in a time of crisis. And then I also would add to this the researcher, right? The researcher, maybe you get a diagnosis for something and then your researcher becomes activated. And again, the thing in parts work, we're not trying to get rid of parts. We can't, because we all have parts. It's like the way it's the way the psyche actually works from, this perspective. What we're trying to do is we're trying to, typically the things that we want to change in our life are parts that are in extreme roles, right? And some of these parts, when in crisis, some of these parts really can take you out. I'm going to go into some detail. I've been going into more detail on like four of these in each of the webinars. So I'm going to go into some more details on the last four here. So the minimizer is very similar to the denier. While the denier claims that nothing is wrong, the minimizer says, it's not so bad, or this is fine. This can be even more dangerous than ignoring the issue. Instead, the minimizer makes it normal. How is this part protecting you? What is the impact? This part supports your resolve to continue on. By minimizing the danger or impact of the situation, the minimizer keeps you going through fearful times. That's very useful in life or death situations, but that kind of immediate survival is a rare case. Instead, the minimizer puts off addressing the issue, and the problem can meanwhile grow and get worse, like a wound or injury being ignored. Yeah, one of the things that you'll see with these parts is parts trigger parts, right? And like the horribilizer, something may happen, and then your horribilizer might spin up so many horrible things that happen that you just become incapacitated with fear or despair, and then your burrower gets activated and you burrow into it, right? Like, there's a lot of instances where one of these parts will trigger a whole series of parts. And I want to really invite you, these slides are all available on the replay, and obviously in the course I'll be going into this in more detail. But I want to invite you to go through this list, look at your crisis response parts, and see if you can tell, like, which is the first one that gets triggered, and then are there others that come online, right? And start to understand the system of crisis response parts that become active in you. Now, we always have the option of just unblending from our parts and coming back to center. And so just take a breath. What to do instead? Take a breath and come back to your center. The centered self is clear enough to recognize the true impact of the current situation, courageous enough to face it, and compassionate enough to let yourself be vulnerable and ask for help. If you think you might be minimizing something and you're not sure, like you just can't, then talk to other people. Get some feedback from some other people. See what they think. Sometimes we are in our own little reality bubble and we need another perspective. The cloud gazer, right? This part can find a silver lining on any dark cloud. While the cloud gazer seeks to cheer theirself and others, it ends up being more like the minimizer in an advanced form of denial. This bright side view of hard times can also be received as irritating at best and patronizing at worst. How is this part protecting you? What is the impact? Most of us have been told to turn a negative into a positive. That's very useful for day-to-day life. However, in a crisis, This part swoops in to distract from the seriousness of the issue. This leads to avoidance of responsible action and a failure to understand the severity of the issue. Take a breath and come back to your center. What to do instead, right? Take a breath. Come back to your center. The centered self is courageous enough to admit how serious a situation may be. By centering, we become compassionate and connected enough to accept how difficult and scary this situation is to others and ourselves. I have a pretty strong cloud gazer. Like, I think what happens to me in crisis is my hero or caretaker gets triggered. And, even doing this course is coming out of that, right? Like, I was like so motivated to like save the day, right? Like, Susan, let's do a course. Let's support everyone right now, right? So my caretaker comes out, and then a lot of times I will use my minimizer or my cloud gazer will try and calm other people's nervous systems, especially people that are caught in their horribilizers, right? And you know that's kind of my default pattern, right? And it's really through this work and coming up with this framework that I'm becoming so incredibly clear about that. And again, the positive perspectives, the cloud gazer is kind of like the opposite of the horribilizer, right? The horribilizer is spinning out worst case scenarios. The cloud gazer is spinning out best case scenarios. And the truth is, a lot of times we just don't know, actually. So why not entertain the worst case scenario and the best case scenario? And of course, the complexity with what we're dealing with right now is a lot of the worst case scenarios are or have been played out somewhere else on the planet. So it's very easy to get plugged into that media stream of media of seeing the worst case scenarios. But yeah, but when I'm in my centered self, right? Like I can acknowledge that. And I had my own evolution as this pandemic continued on, of like coming out of minimizing, coming out of denial, coming out of cloud gate, that I think most of us have, right? As the reality started to really dawn, that like, oh no, something really real is happening here. And I'm not paranoid at all. So, and I run in some circles where there's a fair number of people that whose thinking is very open to lots of different ways of seeing the world. And and a lot of the paranoid stuff is kind of related to the horribilizer, right? Like really horrible things that are happening then that we don't even know about, right? But and the other thing is, I want to, if you're a strong cloud gazer and you've just been sitting in gratitude for the coronavirus and that's been working for you, I want to acknowledge that we are all so different, and that these parts really show up to help and protect us. So I am not in any way, if you're paranoid and a cloud guy, I am not pathologizing that or saying that that's wrong to do that, but I do want to point out that they're parts, and if you were to unblend from that part and move into your centered self, you probably would have a different, more grounded, realistic perspective. But so the paranoid, like other fear response parts that overextend, the paranoid goes beyond preparing for the worst. The paranoid creates the worst case scenarios. If perception and belief create reality, then the paranoid creates elaborate stories of persecution and magical thinking. How is this part protecting you? What is the impact? By inventing boogeymen and conspiracies, this part gives you something else to focus on instead of the current crisis. Like Don Quixote fighting windmills that might be monsters, this part gives us something imaginary to worry about rather than facing our troubles. There's another kind of perspective on paranoia that I don't remember where I read it, but it really resonated for me, was that, it may be that those people are just aware of more data points, right, in the way they process information. And so the conspiracy is just a way of explaining all that in a way that makes sense to them, right? And and just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, right? That's the thing we always have to throw into the mix is, maybe there's a germ of truth somewhere in, a conspiracy theory. And what could we learn from that? Again, what to do instead? Take a breath, come back to your center. The centered self is curious about what's really happening, as well as clear enough to observe the facts and courageous enough to face them. The exterminator, when focused and directed action is needed, the exterminator instead will try to eradicate the problem. As an analogy, the exterminator could find and remove a nest, but instead they will fumigate an entire building. Overkill is the exterminator's game. I don't really, this is a part that I'm kind of theorizing. I'm actually kind of theorizing it based on the Enneagram and different personality types. But I don't know any exterminators. You may know of an exterminator. Maybe this is the land of the military, right? Military responses to crisis. What is this part protecting you from? What is the impact? Like the dictator, this part seeks to control situations and outcomes by using a broad and drastic approach. This clampdown takes every measure available to keep you safe. The impact can be unintended or even accepted collateral damage to yourself and others. Oh, I could think of a place this part might come up: cancer diagnoses. Right? When you're suddenly faced with that choice of, like, do we operate? Do we cut something off? Right? Like, this part might show up that's like, yes, just get rid of it. I don't care. Let's just get rid of it. Again, we're not saying there's anything bad with these parts, but if you were reacting from your centered self, it would be different. There would be more nuance in your decision. There would be more weighing the pros and the cons. There might be multiple opinions gotten. What to do instead? Again, when you notice you're blended with a part, take a breath. I'm going to teach you something. There's an acronym I'm going to be using in this new course, which is BFF. BFF. And BFF stands for breathe. And take 3 deep breaths. Breathe. Feel your body. Come out of your mind and just feel your body. And find your feet. Find your feet or your seat. So BFF, breathe. Feel your body. Find your feet or your seat. BFF. When you notice you're blended with parts, when you notice that you're not in your center, BFF. Breathe. Feel your body. Find your feet. A really simple, quick grounding exercise. Usually when we're blended, a lot of times when we're blended with parts, we're lost in our head. So coming into the body brings you into the present moment and brings you into the centered self. The indulger, right? The indulger distracts with pleasure and comfort. It may focus on food, drugs, and alcohol, sex, video games, or any other comforting stimulus. These are still distractions at best, and at worst, the indulger enters a trance-like numbness and loss of consciousness. How is this part protecting you? What is the impact? By plunging into comfort foods and other self-soothing strategies, this part finds temporary shelter from fear and discomfort. Now, the indulger I've been talking about for years, right? That's part of the BLE parts map. And so a lot of us have done a lot of work with our indulgers and have really those of us that have really settled into strong bright line eating programs have really got our indulgers on board with not using food as a primary way of comforting us. The impact is usually very quick to surface in physical health as well as emotional and mental. We also, once again, avoid facing the situation. Again, if you're numbing, so much of the success of getting an indulger in line has to do with learning how to feel your feelings and process your feelings. Learning how to feel your feelings and process your feelings. That is what we're going to be teaching in this course. That's the breakthrough tool set for getting your indulger under control, is to be able to notice what you're feeling and feel the feelings rather than have to go to the food. And then have some ways of processing those feelings, which is one of the things you'll be learning in our course. What to do instead? BFF. Take a breath or two or three. Feel your body. Find your feet or your seat. Yeah, and then come back. Come back to what you're doing. So parts trigger parts, a vicious circle, right? Parts can generate more fear and overwhelm. They can magnify the fear, triggering other parts. An example is the horribilizer exacerbates the fear, and then the burrower is triggered and hides under the covers. Example, the denier pretends nothing is wrong. The situation gets worse, and the stockpiler is activated. The centered self can see this cycle happening and intervene. What we're teaching you in parts work is how to become self-aware in a really useful, nuanced way, where you can take any issue in your life that is bothering you, that places you're stuck or places you are having problems, and you can look at that issue from a parts perspective and start to see the system of parts that are at play in that issue. And then there's a whole process we teach you on how to start to get to know those parts, how to start, first being able to understand the system of parts. And then, any issue usually has a little system of parts that's is coalescing around that issue, right? Some wounded parts, some protective parts, and they're very specific, and they're not hard to see and understand once you learn this language, the language of parts work. Once you learn how to go and compassionately go inside and become self-aware, and things can really change. I suspect that there are many people that have listened to this webinar who are now convinced, based on Susan's amazing presentation on why the mini minds, why parts work is so useful, who are going to see their crisis response parts in this presentation, and then they're going to be able to come back to their centered self. They're going to be able to notice when that when those parts are activated. One of the ways you can notice that parts are activated is where you experience them in your body, right? Where in your body do you experience fear? Common places include the chest, including sensations in the heart and outside of it, the throat, including tightness, the lungs, including shortness of breath, the abdomen, including stomach aches or diarrhea, the head, including headaches, jaw pain, teeth grinding, confusion, or a fuzzy feeling. The sex organs, including a drive to have sex to release stress or numb out. The arms and hands, including tingling or the urge to touch and hold others. And we didn't put legs on here, but I'm sure some people feel their parts in their legs, right? What do we lose when these parts control us, right? Like we know when we're able to operate from our center self that we're going to have the best outcomes, for us and others. But when our parts are in the lead, when a part is driving the bus rather than your centered self, right? Many times there's a loss of self-care, right? We start to get caught up in whatever the crisis is, and we stop taking care of ourselves, right? In the land of bright line eating land, this might mean that our lines start to get wonky, or we start to ignore bright line eating and go back to our old default eating habits, which we're going to probably be very unhappy about at some point. We lose, there's a loss of concentration and clarity. There's a loss of peace, agitation when peace is available. There's a loss of sobriety when sobriety has been fought for. There's a loss of possibility. A brighter future is never attempted or imagined. So what do we do, right? I've just presented to you all these different kinds of parts that can get activated in a crisis. What do we do? So recognition is liberation. Sometimes just simply understanding what a part is enough to unblend from it and move back to your centered self. I call that recognition is liberation. Many of you, now that we've named the stockpiler, if that part is active in you, you probably won't do it anymore. Or if you do, you'll realize that you're like, oh, this is my stockpiler, right? Do I really actually need blah, blah, blah? Again, you may choose to go along with the part. Familiarity is strength. Building a relationship with these parts helps for quicker recognition and intervention when they activate. In this course that we're doing, Brightline Grit, I'm going to be teaching, in addition to the crisis response parts, the BLE parts map, right? These 5 parts that when you get to know them and really get to understand how they operate in your psyche, it gives you a huge amount of freedom in your program and the ability to make different choices and feel better. So what you're doing, and you'll be building relationships with parts in this course in through a lot of journaling, a lot of writing about, again, understanding the system of parts around an issue inside of you. Connection is support. We're not in this alone. Parts may try to keep us isolated, but by reaching out, we gain much needed support. That's why the isolator is one of the BLE parts map parts, right? It is so useful once you get to know your isolator, because the isolator is the part that's keeping you from reaching out for support. And many times, if we're struggling, all that's really needed is to reach out for support. Like, that's all that's needed. But we have parts that tell us, our isolator tells us, like, oh, no one cares about my problems. There's no support. No one's reliable. Anyway, that's the isolator. You'll learn about that part. So, yeah, so that's the end of the slideshow. And see are you there, Susan?
am.
There you are. Hi.
I am. Hi. All right. So I am going to give a presentation on the
That's
neuroscience
right.
underlying all of
Thank you.
this. Yeah, let's talk about our brains a little bit. What's going on inside of our brains? I'm getting my PowerPoint together here, and I'm going to make myself bigger, bigger, and share my PowerPoint. So Everett just gave us a beautiful description of the psychology, the sort of psychic system, all these parts that get triggered when we are threatened, when there's a crisis, when our system perceives some sort of threat and goes into a fear response. I'm going to talk about fear in the brain, and I'm going to talk about the chemicals that get released when we're afraid, and I'm going to talk about what the brain wants to bring us back to center. That idea of coming back to center. I love that. And I love how we used to call the centered self the highest self or the authentic self. And now we're adding to the mix centered self, which I love. They're all synonymous, right? I mean, you know, it's really a concept, and every bit of language that we try to fit to it isn't exact. It's not an exact match, but they're all pretty good. And I like centered self a lot. So let's talk about coming back to center in our brains. And it lines up with the parts psychology really well that Everett presented. So I'm going to present stuff now from a book called Habits of a Happy Brain by Loretta Breuning. And if you want more, there's more in that book. It's a good book. I recommend it. Okay, so we get scared. Woof, we get scared. And then these parts of us get activated. And to talk about the brain, I want us to remember, please, that human beings are mammals, and we evolved with brains in a particular way for a particular reason. And we have structures in our brain that are still very, very similar to amphibians, to reptiles. We go all the way back. So what we have that distinguishes us is a much, 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 much bigger cortex with all kinds of extra neurons that store life experience, really by wiring. You hear all the time the phrase "wire the brain for this," "wire the brain for that." Well, it's happening every day. You don't need to really do anything other than live your life to wire your brain. Your brain is wiring from your experiences to predict certain things, to respond in certain ways to certain cues. Cues are just things that happen, you know, time of day or location or a sight or a sound or a smell or a particular style of interaction or a dance move or whatever. They're all cues that your brain learns to respond to in a certain way. So all that learning and growth takes place in the cortex. Now, deeper inside, you've got the limbic system, the structures that manage the neurochemicals. I like the phrase neurochemicals. Sometimes I get tripped up. You know, there's neurotransmitters, which really are localized to the nervous system in the brain. They transmit across the synapse. We're talking really microscopic. And they get released in the synaptic cleft and then sucked back up. And then there's hormones, which aren't that different. They just travel further through the body. They go through the bloodstream and bind to receptors on sites all through the body, as opposed to being localized right in the brain. And then there's neuropeptides that are both. This book calls them chemicals a lot, which, you know, seems a little weird because I always think of chemicals as like things I don't want sprayed on my fruit or something. But yeah, they really are all these little molecules, these chemicals, neurochemicals. And deep in the limbic system, there are these structures, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. Hippocampus is memory. It makes our memories. It's our memory factory. And then the memories migrate actually out. It's a process called consolidation, which takes a year or two, and the memories migrate out to the cortex and finally become permanent, and they get stored out in the outer reaches of our brain. The amygdala is really a fear threat detection system. So it is linked in with cortisol, which we're going to talk about in a second. And yeah, emotion, but mainly fear. Now, the hypothalamus regulates sex and eating and all kinds of circadian rhythm things. It's very linked into the endocrine system, the hormones through the pituitary gland and so forth. And all this stuff is like, you know, kind of, I don't know, 2 inches behind your forehead, deep, maybe 3 inches behind your forehead, deep in the brain. Now, toward the back and the base of your brain, more toward your spinal cord, you've got the reptilian brain, the hind brain, with the cerebellum and the brainstem, also the medulla oblongata and the pons. The brainstem and the hindbrain in general, they regulate your routine bodily functions, and they can operate separately from the rest of the brain. And this is how it's possible for someone to go into a sort of permanent, persistent vegetative state, meaning, you know, they're making urine and their eyes will dilate and they can digest food, and they can't move their hands to eat food, but if there were food in their belly, they could digest it, and they can sweat and their heart's pumping and they're breathing and all that, but they have no life in them anymore, right? They're not thinking, they're not feeling any particular way about any particular thing. They're essentially dead, except they're brain dead, right? They're like their body is still dead, but is still alive, but their brain's dead. So that's the reptilian brain, and it makes sure that your bodily functions happen. Now, eating has an interesting sort of spillover. Eating is essential, you know, so the reptilian brain governs things like coughing so you don't choke, right? Your reptilian brain is actually like all the reflexes, all the sneezing and all that sort of stuff. And eating it's hormonally regulated, but it's also like the brainstem makes sure that you don't starve to death. And so there's just some interesting overlap there between those two parts of the brain when it comes to eating. And then of course the cortex is deciding, you know, what would taste good, and, you know, do I feel like driving, you know, to the grocery store tonight or whatever. So if you look at a comparison of the brain parts, you see that the human cortex, again, is really, really large, relatively. The other structures, like check out the hindbrain, really hasn't changed much. It really hasn't over the eons. And what I want you to keep in mind is that survival used to be really, really, really hard. So basically, we evolved a brain that became a threat detection, a threat detection machine. The brain evolved to scan for threats and to incentivize immediate actions to overcome those threats. Even if immediate action doesn't seem warranted, that doesn't matter. The presence of a threat means the brain wants to see you in action. And you can imagine why, because winter is long, right? And as soon as the thought, you know, boy, I wonder how long winter's going to be this year happens, some cortisol comes out. It's a hormone that makes you afraid, that makes you worried, that makes you stressed, and in high doses makes you fearful, downright afraid. And you needed that to take it seriously enough, and then your brain kicks into action saying, we got to do something about this. Okay. So basically what your brain has evolved to experience is a chemical seesaw, where a threat, which releases cortisol, needs to be counterbalanced by some mitigating happy chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, or endorphin. And collectively, these are the chemicals that make the brain feel okay again, make the brain feel like, at least for now, you've handled the threat. You have successfully done something to inch you closer to survival, reproduction, health and well-being, you know, as the brain used to define it, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And then, of course, you know, the if the threats are really big, right, the threats become enormous, and then the brain needs like really, really good happy chemicals to counterbalance. And then if the enormous threats are still there, well, the seesaw can be quite extreme. So I want you to meet your happy chemicals now. You've got dopamine. Now, this is the one we're typically familiar with, and this is the one I talked about in my book a lot, my 2 books, actually. Dopamine produces the joy of finding things that meet your needs, the eureka, I got it feeling. It has to do with the pursuit, the chase, and the capture of things that your brain deems evolutionarily important, like sex, like food, like anything that sort of gets you closer to a predetermined goal. All right. It's the yes, we're getting there, or yes, I found it, or oh, good. This is it. So it's not really a pleasure feeling. It's the feeling of more. It's the feeling of pursuit. So dopamine likes to pursue. It likes to find. And it likes to feel like it found it. So dopamine is released, for example, when we are searching the web. I don't know if you have, I have right now, certain websites that I'm checking. Do you have websites that you're checking? I'll tell you what mine are. I check the Dow. I'm kind of curious what's going on with the stock market every day. It's like so up and so down. It's redonkulous. So I'm checking the Dow. So I'm always typing in Dow Jones today. So I'm checking that. I'm checking the worldometers.info to track the coronavirus spread. I'm tracking, let's see, there's this other one, live updates, coronavirus, Rochester Regional Health for coronavirus in Western New York. So I track the cases and the deaths in my local area. Curious what's going on in my local area. And I'm checking Brightliners Land. Those are the sites that I'm checking. Do you have sites that you're checking? If you do, you're being controlled by dopamine. That's dopamine. And that the feeling of when you remember, oh, I haven't checked the thing today, right? That's a spark of cortisol launching you into pursuit. The minute you turn toward pursuing it, you're releasing dopamine. And when you've checked, you get the dopamine, and then you come back to baseline. That's a cortisol dopamine ping pong match right there. Serotonin produces the feeling of being respected by others, pride. Oxytocin produces the feeling of being safe with others, now called bonding. Endorphin produces the oblivion that masks pain, often called euphoria. Now, if you're feeling like, I don't really relate to those terms, that's fair. That's fair, but it's because the limbic system works without words. I promise you, your brain cares about these things. Everybody cares about being a part of, like not kicked out of the community, a part of the group. That's serotonin. Our social standing and how we're held in others' view matters. It really does. And serotonin is tracking that. People need touch and human connection and bonding and trust and interaction, and that's oxytocin. People need movement, and that's endorphin, and people need to make sure that they're pursuing enough food, sex, or relationship, or just pursuing things, like making progress toward things, and that's what dopamine is tracking. But you might have different words for it, or maybe none of those words resonate, but I promise you your brain cares about these things. So again, the 4 happy chemicals are dopamine, the joy of finding what you seek; serotonin, the security of social importance; oxytocin, the comfort of social alliances; and endorphin, the oblivion that masks pain. So with dopamine, you want to seek rewards. That's how you're going to get it to release. And so we're going to help you set up good rewards, right? Good games to play, right? Like I'm such a fan of the calendar tracker, where You set up, I'm going to put an X for every Brightline meal, for every Brightline day, the nightly checklist. These are all things that release dopamine for good reasons and in good ways. Serotonin, get respect from others. Just posting in Brightliners Land or in one of our Facebook groups, especially, it's really interesting. We have such a sweet community where we sort of incentivize radical vulnerability, where if you're a hot mess and you show up in there and like post what's real, the love that floods in there and the warm embrace of people's like, hey, I hear you, I'm the same, or you got this, or whatever. The serotonin that gets released from that is off the hook. It's amazing. And then oxytocin is building social alliances. Oxytocin is released in large doses during sexual intercourse, during hugs, during breastfeeding, during childbirth, in smaller doses during laughter and smiling. When you're trusted, like if someone loans you money, oxytocin surges, shows that they trust you in some kind of way. Oxytocin, when it goes up, also makes you trust others more, but it doesn't make you gullible. It actually increases your discernment about who is trustworthy and who is not, which is really interesting. So oxytocin, as it rises, facilitates nuanced and deep bonding with each other. And with endorphin, we can ignore physical pain and it can produce real euphoria. Brisk walks these days are a really good way to get endorphin. As a matter of fact, I'm a big fan, and I'm recommending the 3 times a day walk, after breakfast, after lunch, after dinner. Just go walk around the neighborhood. So each chemical has a job. Dopamine has to motivate you to get what you need, even when it takes a lot of effort. Getting enough food and reproduction both took a lot of effort back in the day, like, millennia ago. In particular, getting enough food. So dopamine is a driver. It is a slave driver. And this is why when we get trapped in its spider web and, our brains get hijacked with dopamine downregulation, and we need to eat more and more of those fake foods to get the flood that the brain has come to expect, we can become real slaves to it, right? Those circuits heal, thank goodness. And then normal pursuits will produce enough dopamine for the brain to stay happy. But dopamine really cares about its sex and about its food and about pursuits in general. This is how gaming addiction comes up, right? Those games are just set up to like incentivize the pursuit, and then the bling, the thing comes, the gold coins, the stars, the whatever it is that you're tracking, the points, the whatever. That's a dopamine hamster wheel, basically. Slot machines, all that sort of stuff, all the addictions, all of the games, they're all dopamine releasing playgrounds. Serotonin motivates you to get respect, which is basically essential to keep your standing in the community, in the clan, in the tribe, and to expand your mating opportunities and protect your offspring. Oxytocin motivates you to trust others, to find safety and companionship. It also bonds you with your children, with your partner or partners. It bonds you with the people that you are in close association with. And it helps you, again, be more discerning about whom to trust as well. Oxytocin is sometimes called the cuddle hormone. And it's released during touch. It's released during smiling, laughing together, just being together on a deep level. It can be released virtually, not as easily, though. Endorphin motivates you to ignore pain so you can escape from harm when you're injured. So how does this work in real life? The way it works is all throughout the day, the cortex is looking for patterns that match things you experienced in the past. So cues and responses. It's looking for times of day and location and sights and sounds and smells and so forth. It's noticing interactions. It's noticing, if maybe a threat comes into the environment, then the cortex is going to respond in a way, it's going to look for a pattern in that threat, and it's going to respond in a way that you got wired to respond from your past. And then the limbic system deeper down in the brain releases chemicals that say, oh yeah, this pattern that you just identified, that's good for you. Go toward that. You want some of that. You want more of that. Or no, this is scary. This is bad for you. You want to avoid it. So the amygdala is going to release cortisol if the limbic system is deciding it's a threat, that it's bad for you. The limbic system might release some of your happy chemicals if it wants you to pursue and go toward it. Now, the cortex doesn't always act. So you don't always act on the chemicals that the limbic system releases because the cortex can override the limbic system. The cortex is ultimately in charge, and this is the seat of our decision making, our executive control center. But sometimes the brain can get very, very, very hijacked by an overactive limbic system, and it can be very hard to find the control again. And this is one of the things that Bright Line Eating helps with, right? Like our program understands the lay of the land and how the brain gets hijacked with something called dopamine downregulation, where you've been eating too much sugar and flour. The dopamine receptors have gotten blown out and they've thinned out and they've become less numerous and less responsive. And you've become reliant on this steady hit of massive amounts of dopamine from sugar and flour to keep those receptors happy. We basically have created a program that removes that entirely and then gives you a sufficient substitute while your brain heals, gives you things to do and ways to get enough dopamine while your brain heals, and then ultimately rebuilds your brain. That's basically how Bright Line Eating works. When the cortex wants to override the limbic system, the cortex can suggest an alternative. Like, hey, I don't actually agree with that chemical onslaught you just gave me. I don't want to respond to that. How about we do this instead? And then the limbic system is going to have a reaction to that. Here it likes it. It might not. It might say, no, we need to go eat that, right? In which case the cortex might need to put its foot down. At the end of the day, the cortex wins though. The limbic system sparks an action, but the cortex carries out the action. So motor cortex, which is necessary to move, to actually carry out an action, motor cortex is in cortex. So the cortex wins. Those chemicals don't have the final say, but it can be very, very uncomfortable. The brain did not evolve to ignore the limbic system. The limbic system is the threat alert system. And we are supposed to go into action to respond to it. So if we're not going to respond in the typical way, we're going to have a good alternative backup in mind. Because remember the point of this, your brain has some quirks. It cares for the survival of your genes as urgently as it cares for your body or your survival right now. It cares that you live on into the future. It really cares about that. And it's trying to scan the environment for threats that might hinder your survival. And it wires itself from early experience, even though that's an imperfect guide to adult survival. I mean, like, age 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like young kid, right? That's where most of our wiring is happening. Now you can rewire the brain as an adult, and we do in Bright Line Eating all the time, and it's just not easy. It takes a lot of focus and it takes time, and you have to repeat the patterns and so forth. Now, it would be nice to stop the cortisol assault with permanent solutions to every problem and just eventually get rid of all the problems and then live in a utopia. That would be awesome. But it's not possible. It's not possible because all kinds of things that are just simply unavoidable trigger cortisol, like disappointment, like just classic disappointment. You had an expectation and it didn't turn out the way you thought, or like take your grocery list to the grocery store and they don't have what you're wanting, right? For example, for example, right? Your cortisol helps you make course corrections on the path to meeting your needs and staying alive. It's cortisol that does that. So you need cortisol to make sure that you're going to successfully get to point B when you've left point A. Cortisol alerts you when plan A isn't working and you need to find a plan B. So you need your cortisol. You wouldn't want to live in a world without your cortisol. The problem also is, though, even when plan A works or you get to plan B finally, the happy chemicals don't last. It's really sad. They don't last hardly at all. To get more, you have to do more. And this is how a brain keeps convincing a body to do what it takes to stay alive. This is what it takes. Constant scanning the environment for threats and then doing what's needed to advance our survival. That's how the brain evolved. In terms of the happy chemicals going away, they go away really fast. They get reabsorbed. And so this is like how one neuron communicates with another neuron. The happy chemicals, the neurotransmitters, are in these little vesicles here. They get released and they get picked up over here, and the message continues on. But then these chemicals just get reabsorbed and ready for the next time. It takes constant action, basically, to keep the brain happy. As soon as they get reabsorbed, your awareness of all the threats in your environment comes back. We just have a brain that scans for threats. It's what it does. So the bottom line is, when the brain finds what it considers to be a threat, and it considers a threat, if your cortisol is up at all, there's definitely a threat around, according to your brain. And then the brain kicks you with this, you got to do something feeling. Unless you're distracted by happy chemicals. The solution there is to get some happy chemicals on board. Now, you can get out of the trap of like eating, for example, when the brain's kicking you to get some food because it notices that your stress has ratcheted up and your cortisol is high and it wants some food. You can get out of that trap. And what it takes is not responding to that kick, not eating that food, right? And the best way to do that is to have an alternative action lined up already, something that's going to release some happy chemicals. And this is where the Bright Line Eating Program comes in. This is why we talk about calling, making a phone call if you want to eat, or the other things that release happy chemicals, right? Because there's lots of them. And, eating isn't the only thing people are pulled to, right? I love that quote. Everything I like is either immoral, illegal, or fattening. Such a great picture. Is that Brad Pitt? Everything that triggers happy chemicals has side effects. Basically, anything taken to an extreme will prove problematic. So when you get hooked on getting happy chemicals a certain way, you're headed for trouble. You're headed for trouble. That's not the way to have a balanced, peaceful, happy life, because anything overused or taken to an extreme will be problematic. But the good news is that lots of healthy things trigger happy chemicals too. Meditation does. This kind of activity does. I mean, this guy here, I know we can't go out and do this right now, but we can do some related things. I mean, oh my goodness. I know that Everett had a Marco Polo group with a bunch of bright liners in his Gideon games, and they did like a dance challenge. So they were on video, and they like put on music, and they were all dancing around. So that releases endorphin because of the physical activity. It releases oxytocin because of the smiling and the laughing. It releases serotonin because you're now bonded with the you're like this guy here. His status among this social group is secure. It's going up. He's a part of the group. That's serotonin right there. And then the other piece is, if you can gamify it at all, you can actually release dopamine too. Like if he's actually about to score a point, that's dopamine. So that's all 4 happy chemicals right there. She might be getting all 4 happy chemicals too. She's definitely getting oxytocin with this baby, the cuddling, and if she just breastfed, even better. She is probably getting some serotonin because her partner is probably so happy that she just got that baby down to sleep, right? And they can both relax now. So that's oxytocin and serotonin. She probably had a goal to get the baby to sleep, so dopamine just got released because of that. She just achieved that goal. And I don't know, maybe the baby was like sucking on the nipples too hard, and she got some endorphin released for some pain relief as well. She got all 4 there as well, let's assume. So in the right rhythm and proportion, a beautiful life filled with ample happy chemicals can be built. And, I don't know if you've been on any of the Facebook Lives I've been doing lately, or maybe you're one of these people. Every time I go live these days, there's multiple people who say something to the effect of, I'm doing really well. I'm holding on to my bright lines tight. It's all I have control over right now. I'm feeling pretty calm, pretty weighed and measured. Super grateful for Bright Line Eating. What would I do during a time like this without Bright Line Eating? And I don't know how you're doing. Maybe you're struggling horribly and you want to just, you know, wring these people's necks and go, I'm so jealous or mad at you or whatever, right? Maybe you don't love the thought that there's people who are getting through this time like that. But I'll tell you why they're doing that, why it's working for them like that. They're not called by the food right now. And they're not called by the food because they had already invested a bunch, probably not just for months, but probably more than a year, right? They had invested a lot in the system of Bright Line Eating that delivers an ample dose of happy chemicals all throughout the day when you actually do it. The morning routine, the weighing and measuring the food, eating what you wrote down the night before, the connection with the buddy, the mastermind group, the Marco Polo, the Gideon games, being of service a little bit, having some status in the community, helping people out, being connected, the evening routine, the planning for the next day. There is so much dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin being released and all that. And if they're going out for a couple walks, 2-3 walks a day, their brain has so much happy chemical on board that they are prepared for the cortisol flood. Like the cortisol that's ramping up at this time, they're stepping up their game with their program and they're covered. They're covered. Their brain doesn't need to tell them to eat. And if the brain does say, are you sure you don't want to eat? Because there's a lot of cortisol going on right now. It's just a brief butterfly of a thought landing on their shoulder and they can just brush it away really quickly. They can make a phone call about it and get some happy chemicals another way. That's what's happened for them. Now, on the other hand, maybe you're trapped in a vicious circle. And it's pretty vicious. So the vicious circle is eating too much food or unhealthy food produces a bunch of dopamine and some serious relief. Like mega flood of dopamine, serious relief. And that takes away the cortisol for a bit. Like that, the brain gets happy for a moment. But then once the dopamine subsides, your awareness of eating too much or the wrong stuff right then becomes your next immediate threat. Oh no, I just ate all that food, all that NMF. And then cortisol is released when shame, disappointment, frustration, and fear come into the mix. That releases a bunch of cortisol. Oh, and by the way, then you're reminded about, oh yeah, and we're still on lockdown and it's quarantine and, and suddenly you're in deep desperation and overwhelm. So cortisol goes up. And when your next best strategy is to eat more, now you're trapped in a vicious circle. It's basically a cortisol dopamine ping pong match and you're the loser. So in parts language, this is food indulger, food controller. Food indulger, food controller. That's basically the ping pong match. This is the neuroscience of the ping pong match, the parts work of the ping pong match. Now, your awareness of eating too much becomes your next immediate threat. Shame, disappointment, frustration, fear. This is also inner critic. This is inner critic. And likely the isolator comes in as well to make sure you don't call anybody about it. And then the food indulger comes in and says, partners with the food, with the isolator. And together they say, you don't need to connect with anybody and some more food will make this go away, at least for now. And that's the circle. And it's essentially a shame spiral. We need food for survival. That's a challenge. And then all these frankenfoods that are around release way too much dopamine. So they're just an easy fix for stress release. So the more cortisol is amped up in your environment because of this pandemic that's going on around, or the crisis that you're in, whatever it is, the more a solution of this magnitude starts to feel attractive to the brain, because this is a redonkulous amount of dopamine, like just obscene. And the brain starts to think that it really wants that. It really needs that. Now, to do different, if you've been trapped in that shame spiral or that vicious circle, let's say, your whole life, essentially, your brain is kind of like this. And bright line eating is that. Like, we need to get a machete into your hand. We need to get some very clear instructions of what you're going to do. And one day at a time, as you carry it out, you're beating a path. But it takes time. You don't get a path like this. You know, those people who are on those Facebook Lives saying, I'm so serene and I'm just tootling through this time and thank God for bright line eating. I'm not thinking about food. I'm doing great. They have a brain now that has pathways where they want them in the right place that trigger them to take the right actions based on stress. And you can maintain it. You can maintain it, but it takes time to create that. These kinds of pathways don't happen overnight. This is like months and years of daily treading and stomping down this ground and making sure that the underbrush is pushed back and so forth. This is daily maintenance. So the answer is to build a new brain by creating brand new paths, essentially. Build a new brain by creating brand new paths. Oh no, this was supposed to be changed. And that takes grit. Oh no. Shoot, I thought that got changed. Okay, so let me actually, I have the thing right here, I believe, don't I? Yes, I do. So, not easy, but doable. It takes grit. Ta-da! So, grit is the scientific term for the perseverance and the passion that it takes to endure a rough time and successfully get out to the end. Grit is a combination of perseverance and passion. And we had a course called Brightline Sisu, and the vlog that just came out a couple hours ago, it's out now, brightlineeating.com, and click on the blog tab, or if you're on the email list, you got an email in your inbox, and the subject line is, let's see, it's in my inbox. The subject line is, nope, my assistant already deleted it from my inbox. Boy, she is so efficient. Anyway, the subject line is the weekly vlog, inclusivity update, Sisu, tribe, and swearing. It's interesting. You'll want to watch it. So someone wrote in saying, I have her email right here. Someone wrote in saying, she said, Susan, please don't use the word Sisu. It's part of the Finnish national identity, and if you're not Finnish, you really shouldn't use it. I lived in Finland, speak both national languages, and beg you please don't adopt that word. The Finns suffered for 1,000 years at the hands of Russia, and Sweden. This is a specific kind of national pride that they have at overcoming all that. I could go on, but this email is probably too long already, but just saying, if you're not Finnish, you can't have Sisu. So I talked with my diversity and inclusivity coach, and she's like, yeah, she's right, actually. There are certain terms, when they're born out of a group's struggle and oppression, it does feel stripping for them when someone who's not of that background uses the term. And she said also, when you're talking about naming a course, now other people have to use the name and so forth, and you don't know if they're comfortable. So she said, come up with a name that's part of the identity of your movement, your program. And of course, science is part of the foundation of our identity, our movement. And so the scientific term for it being grit makes a lot more sense. So we're calling it Brightline Grit, calm and bright through crisis. Yeah, I think I'm going to bring Everett back. I kind of want to tell the story of this conversation that he and I had at 4:30 in the morning the other day.
Here I am.
Hey.
Hey.
So, I was stuck. Holy moly, I was stuck. I was stuck in a vicious circle, and the parts that were active, the main part that, the two parts that were active were my horribilizer and my burrower, and I didn't know those terms. All I knew was that every other day I was having what felt like the worst day of my life. And then on the other days, I was having an amazingly good day. I'd have this amazingly good day, And then the worst day of my life. And then this amazingly good day. And it was like a ping pong match. And it was 16 days in a row of this. I mean, it was getting to the point where like, I'd be like, no, I don't want to talk to my dad a week from Friday because I'll be having a bad day that day. And, you know, so I called Everett at 4:30 in the morning one night. I couldn't sleep. And my horribilizer was kicking in. Well, it was 10:30 at night for him. He's in Maui.
Yeah, let's clarify that.
Yeah. Everett's not like on call for me at 4:30 in the morning every morning. It was 10:30 at night for him. He stays up late. So I called him and he's like, what's going on? And we talked for a long time. And then he was like, I got to go. I'm going to go to bed now. It's midnight. And I said, Everett, I've got this part of me. I'm anxious that you're about to go. And he said, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. I have this part that's saying it's going to be a horrible day. This is slated to be a bad day. Now you haven't slept a wink and you're going to have a horrible day. And he said, oh, you got a horribilizer part. He said, you want to, he asked me 3 questions. This is parts work now. Now, I didn't go into any meditative state or anything. We just had a conversation, but in 5 minutes with 3 questions, he just changed my entire coronavirus experience where I have not had a bad day. How long ago was that, Everett? 2 weeks, 10 days?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not that long ago. Yeah. I think a week.
Yeah. I've had only good days since then, and the cycle got broken. So Everett said, can you personify that part? Like if it were a character, what would it look like? And my horribilizer guy was like the size of a pencil, and he was he looked like Gumby, like kind of rubbery limbs, but he was a reddish purple, and he had a coronavirus head, like a virus ball for a head, like a fuzzy, you know, the pictures of the coronavirus. And anyway, so he was shrieking at me. He was going, you're going to have horrible, you haven't slept at all. You never have a good day when you don't sleep. You're going to be so, blah, 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 blah. And I told Everett, like, he's shrieking at me, like that you're going to have the worst horrible day. And Everett said, can you ask him how he's trying to help? And so I did. So I asked him how he's trying to help, and he said, I just want you to declare it a horrible day so you'll lie on the couch and not expect anything of yourself. Like, I want you to just crawl under the covers and like call it a day. And so I told Everett, I said, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get me to take the day off completely, because that's what I'd been doing on horrible days, is I'd been just declaring myself catatonic and like just crawling under the covers and covering my head up like a burrower. So the horribilizer was triggering the burrower, where I just decided I couldn't face anything. And Everett said, oh, that's interesting. And then Everett said, well, can you take the day off? And I was like, kind of. I looked at my calendar and I was like, I could cancel probably 3/4 of this, you know, but there's a little I got to do. And Everett said, why don't you ask your horribilizer how he feels about the idea of you, instead of having a horrible day, having a rest and recharge day where you really take a load off, but you get a little done that you need to get done. How would he feel about that? And so I asked him, and the little guy was like, okay, I guess that would be all right. Okay. And then he just sat there, and I was like, okay. So I just declared it a rest and recharge day, and I canceled like 4 things on my schedule. And I had a good day, actually. I didn't sleep a wink, but I had a good day. And then that night I got to bed on time, and I've had really good days ever since then. It was 5 minutes of a conversation. All the anxiety about Everett hanging up the phone and me being left alone in the house at 6 a.m. to deal with the rest of my day, all the anxiety floated away. I suddenly felt calm, ready to make breakfast. And that was it. That's parts work. Like, it can be that simple. Like, you just find out what the part wants. Often these parts are having this huge reaction because they just feel like you're not attending to something or listening to something or considering something, and they're shrieking their perspective and like throwing the whole system out of whack. And sometimes you just need to talk to them. It's so helpful.
Hey, Susan.
Yeah.
I realized I forgot to do my guided little parts experience for
Yeah.
people. This would be a great time to do it just after your story.
Yeah, totally. So I have a part that's been coming up for me. I've been experiencing jealousy, which I don't usually experience in a relationship, but I over the summer I remembered through doing some parts work, I got jealous, which, you know, like I have no reason to be jealous. Like my man's as faithful as they come. And but I was really jealous and I started doing some parts work, and I discovered that I'd never really healed from the broken heart that I had in high school, like really serious trauma. Like I had the love of my life, and he met someone else, and within 24 hours, our relationship was shattered. And so anyway, I still haven't healed from that. So I've got this jealous part that keeps getting stirred up, and I'm gonna work on that part. But you've got something you want people to do, and
Yeah. So the real power of parts, there's a lot that we gain through understanding ourselves as parts that's really useful. And but the real power of parts work actually comes when we do experiential work. And so I'm just going to take you through a little guided process. And you could do this as a guided meditation. You could also do it as a journaling exercise and just write out the answers to the questions. But what I want to invite you to close your eyes and take a breath. Do BFF. Take a breath or two or three. Feel your
I
body.
missed it. What is BFF?
Oh, that's my new acronym for breathe, breathe, feel your body, find your feet.
Oh, I
The
missed
new
that.
centering. Yeah.
Breathe, feel your body.
Feel your body, find your feet. BFF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So breathe. Feel your body. When you feel your body, you come out of the mind into the present moment, and then find your feet. That's grounding, or your seat. It's a little grounding exercise. And then if one of those crisis response parts stood out for you, right? Maybe you have a horribilizer, maybe you have a burrower, maybe you have a cloud gazer. I want you to bring that part back to mind. And I want you to see if you can find a memory of when that part was active. Maybe your stockpiler got active and you were in the grocery store filling up your cart. I just find a memory of when that part is active. And then see if you can notice where it shows up in your body as a sensation. If it does, it might not. But for many of us, we'll be able to notice our parts in our body as a sensation. And then just find that sensation in your body. Just bring your awareness there. And if you don't feel it in your body, that's okay. You can just think about this part. And then see if you can allow an image to form of this part. And actually, one of the ways that I like to do this is imagine moving the part now out of your body in front of you, maybe 6 feet. And see if sometimes an image might spontaneously just form to see the part. And if for some reason that doesn't happen, feel free to construct one. And it could be like a person, a cartoon, could even be an object. And then notice how you feel towards that part. Notice how you feel towards that part. I can see my cloud gazer. He's this little boy staring up at the clouds in the sky. But no, and if you're not feeling positive towards that part, because many times if a part's giving us problems, we'll be mad at it. I want you to see if you can just lean into becoming curious about this part. Set those feelings aside and just lean into some curiosity, some openness, some compassion. Because I can tell you that this protector is trying to help you. Even if it's wreaking havoc in your life, it only has a positive intention to help you. Ask the part how it's trying to help you. And don't think about the answer, just see what comes to you. Ask the part, what are you afraid will happen if you don't help me like this? Again, don't think about the answer, just see what comes to you. What are you afraid will happen if you don't help me like this? My little cloud gazer goes, oh, you're going to feel bad. Ask the part how old it thinks you are. And if it thinks you're younger than your actual age, I want you to take a minute and just let this part know that your current age and that you're adult. And let this part see your life as it is now. Many times when a protective part is in an extreme role, it thinks we're very young still. But let this part know that you're actually very capable adult. And if you can find some appreciation, tell this part that you're grateful, that it's for its positive intention, that it's trying to help you. Thank it for its efforts to help you. But tell this part that your centered self, your adult self, really now wants to be in the lead. Now that this protector knows that you're an adult, that you'd like to work with this part and not be led by this part. And this is parts work, right? Like I want to encourage you, maybe after the presentation to come back to this and do some more journaling. Thank this part. Just thank this part. And if you're able, just send it some loving attention from your heart. Again, noticing the image. Ask the part what its name is. It might tell you, it might not. Maybe you'll come up with a name for it. And if this guided visualization didn't quite work for you, don't judge yourself. It's very hard to do one of these with a large group and have it kind of work for everyone, because everyone experiences their parts so differently. But I do want to encourage you to spend some more time thinking about your crisis response parts, maybe do some journaling about them, and then start to notice them when they become activated. And this, in its essence, is the simplicity of parts work. Just like when Susan described what she was doing, we're finding something inside, we're going in, we're personifying it, and then we're getting to know it and building a relationship with it. And this is what I teach people how to do. And this is what I'll be teaching in the new Brightline Grit course. Let's bring Susan back on. There you are.
Hey. All right. So we're almost to Q&A. I'm going to share now about the new course that Everett and I have created, are creating, Brightline Grit, Calm and Bright Through Crisis. And then we're going to unmute the chat thread and do an extended Q&A. Like it's really, ask Susan and Everett anything time. So let me go ahead and share my screen here for one final PowerPoint presentation. And let's see here. Everett, there you go. Yep. Okay, cool. All right. So, yeah. Everett and I and the whole Brightline Eating team, we have an invitation for you. Registration is closing tomorrow, Thursday, April 9th, for this amazing course that we're about to rocket launch off the pad. And it's called Brightline Grit, Calm and Bright Through Crisis. And, I've seen parts work do some amazing things in people's lives. Lyndon, for example, Lyndon Morris Del Rio, who coaches our boot campers and runs our online support community. When I met Lyndon, she was first coming into the boot camp in October of 2014. And she had, 60, 65 pounds to lose. And she had a heart condition that really scared her. And she was a sweet, sweet lady and also quite reactive. She had some very active parts where she would get offended really easily. And I remember in the course, she got really offended at, by something someone did and really kind of threatened to take her toys and go home and, was, reactive to it. And I ended up calling her and calming her down and stuff. And over the years, I've watched her do her parts work, and she has become not offendable, I would say. Like, she is literally, of all the human beings I know on this planet now, one of the most calm, centered, almost to the point where it feels like she's had some kind of a Buddha experience or something. And she's really done her inner work to the point where I think if you ask her, she would say her experience of living is pretty wonderful, that she would want it for others. Like, she's really, really enjoying life in her own skin. And it's amazing to see how much she's changed over the last 5 years. Like, the combination of Brightline Eating and parts work and this sort of presence-centered self stuff that she does it's just amazing. I'm also thinking about Dana Oliver, who was in one of the early boot camps, I think in 2015, I believe, maybe end of 2015. Dana got Brightline Eating right away, lost her weight, transitioned to maintenance, was living in a right-sized body, and then she picked up the food again. And she went through, I think it was a full year, I believe it was a year, where she every single day swore that she would stay bright and then was eating sugar by 10 or 11 a.m. and hating it, hating herself for it and hating it every day, eating sugar by 10 or 11 a.m. and then swearing that she wouldn't do that again. Groundhog Day over and over and over. And when she started learning about parts work from Everett, not one-on-one with him, but in a course, it really took her learning how to do the parts work on herself. She hasn't had a bite off her food plan, I believe, in like a year and a half since she started Bright Line Freedom with Everett. She hasn't taken a bite off her plant. She just learned how to go inside, and the part that is suggesting food as an option, it wants something, and it doesn't actually want food. It wants, it wants something else. It wants love. It wants reassurance. It wants whatever, right? And it's all stuff the highest self can give it. The centered self can just give that part, oh, sweetie, I can help you with that. We don't need to go eat over this. Like, let me help you with that. And Dana just learned how to do that work inside of herself. So beautiful. And then there's me. Parts work helps me so much. And in part, I don't break my lines anymore. Also, I'm like one of the crew who the combination of the reboot, resume, raising the sine wave, getting more support, all that stuff, and then the parts work, it's such a powerful combination. And so in this particular course, we're going to put them together for the first time in one course, because we really believe that that's what people need to get through a crisis. They need targeted help with their program and their food, and they need targeted help with the parts. And there's a symbiotic relationship between keeping the food straight and doing the parts work so that you can keep the food straight. And like Everett said, you get the food straightened up, and then you need a way to do the work on the stuff that comes up, especially if you're in crisis. So in this course, Everett's going to help you discover your centered self and then learn to return to that center always. And again, it's a practice. There will be a lot of parts work in the course. In particular, Everett's going to walk you through in more detail the crisis response parts map, and also the BLE parts map, which he has fleshed out in more detail, and he's going to be presenting a more nuanced version of the Bright Line Eating parts map than he ever has. So if you have already done Bright Line Freedom or seen the Bright Line Eating parts map in detail, this will go beyond that. I do want to make a point here to say that whatever your spiritual or religious perspective is, or lack thereof, this course will help you tap into that and work with it. So whether you're atheist or agnostic, or a devout follower of a religion, or spiritual but not religious, this course will help you find your strong core center self. And if you have a religious practice, it will help you to derive strength from that practice and that set of beliefs to inform your parts work. And we just want to be really clear that there's no conflict between any spiritual or religious perspective and the work that we do in this course. As Everett said, for example, just one example is if you're a born-again Christian and meditation is not something that you do, Everett will be providing journaling prompts to do all the parts work with journaling instead of a meditative experience. Like, it's really, they both work. So there's nothing here in conflict with anyone's spiritual or religious beliefs. And in fact, parts work will make your faith stronger. The work lends itself to being done in small groups, so you can form those groups yourself. You can find people in Bright Liners Land to do that work together with you. Buddies, mastermind groups, Gideon Games groups, Marco Polo groups all work well for this. The work also really lends itself to self-therapy, to doing it on your own inside of yourself. So if you're an introvert or you just really prefer to go through the materials yourself, you can get the full transformation and experience that way. What happens with parts work is you just end up releasing a lot of stuff. In particular, a lot of shame. You end up releasing a lot of shame, guilt, anxiety, burdens from the past, wounds from the past can be healed. And what happens often is some buried core issues often just crack and come up and come to be healed. Like I'm experiencing with this high school trauma that I went through that I had forgotten about. I started using hard drugs right after this, it was so painful for me. And I'd sort of forgotten that directly preceded my, swan dive into hard drugs. So anyway, I came up doing parts work, and now I have this opportunity to heal this stuff. It's really beautiful how you never know kind of what's going to come up. But the good news is it doesn't come up until you have the tools to work on it. So that's, often when you get a sharp set of tools like this, it's amazing what can be healed. What you learn in particular also is how to unblend. So I was talking about how a harmonious, healthy, normal individual, normal's the wrong word, a healthy, harmonious individual without mental illness on board will often, many, many times all throughout the day, be blending and unblending from these parts. They'll be in higher centered self for a second, and then they'll get triggered by something, agitated or whatever, and then they'll be blended with a part. They won't even know it. And then they'll come back to center. They won't even know it. And they're just non-consciously going through these experiences. In this course, Everett will teach you how to unblend from your parts, which means coming back to center. And you experienced a little bit of it in this workshop, right? Take a breath, find your body, find your feet, and come back to center. But there's more to, if you find a part, there's a way to tell if you're blended with it, and there's a way to get unblended from it, and Everett will teach you that. Now, once you're unblended from a part, one of the brilliant things is, and this is something I want to just shout from the rooftops, self-compassion is the best shortcut in the whole universe for developing self-compassion, because it taps into that like outrageous asymmetry of how hard it is to have compassion for yourself, but how easy it is to have compassion for others when they suffer. When we suffer, we tend to be hard on ourselves. When we're struggling, when we're suffering, when we're eating off plan, when we're doing whatever. When other people are suffering or struggling, we tend to be so compassionate with them, right? Like our heart melts at their suffering and their struggle, and we just feel so compassionate. When you unblend from a part and you've sort of turned this part into a character, you feel the compassion for the part, which is you. You develop self-compassion for your own struggles, which is so brilliant. You see why your parts kind of have the perspective that they have. You understand how they came by these, even if their strategies and their tactics aren't necessarily helpful, you totally see why they're wanting what they're wanting. Like my food indulger part, which always just wanted me to binge so that I would take a few hours off, and just sit on the couch and eat. I could see why it wanted that for me, right? And when I started learning how to interact with that part, I started learning how to just, stop and take a bath and take care of myself anyway, while feeling compassion for myself. Now, the research literature on self-compassion is enormous. And some of the things that happen when you develop self-compassion are freedom from depression and anxiety. The literature shows that 1/3 to 1/2 of depression and anxiety are bound up in a lack of self-compassion. So if you can release compassion for yourself, it clears up 1/3 to 1/2 of depression and anxiety. Increased emotional resilience, increased emotional intelligence, and you're on the superhighway to personal growth. It's amazing. Now, this course is going to provide a very clear, comprehensive roadmap and a wonderful mix of methods. So in this course, there will be trainings that Everett will be providing. These will be videos that are, 30, 45-minute long training videos. There will be live group coaching calls, both with Everett and with myself. Everett's doing weekly coaching calls, and I'm doing weekly coaching calls too, separately. He'll be handling the parts work. I'll be handling the food stuff. Everett will be doing witnessed parts work sessions, so you can get an experience of what a longer session sounds like and what some deep work sounds like. There will be guided parts meditations, so you can be doing your parts work. There will be workbook and journaling exercises. And the whole course, the community will be housed in Bright Liners Land, which is the new interactive community that we will be in. We will not be in Facebook for this course. There's no Facebook in this course. So right here is a screenshot of the community, and you can filter it by attributes. If you want to find the people who have young kids, or you want to find the people who live alone, or you want to find the people who are in Florida or whatever. And here is the live feed right here, where you can filter posts by tag. I've just created the first food module for the course, and there's an assignment in there where I'm asking you to filter by the tag commit. That's just a little spoiler alert there. I just told you. But anyway, I give people an assignment to do that. And then the live feed down here, this person has tagged, I'm looking for a buddy. This is my intro. Buddy, I'd like support, intro. You can you can comment. It's just like Facebook in that way. So the course registration began on April 2nd, and it ends tomorrow, April 9th. So this is one of your last chances to register. The course lasts 6 weeks. It ends on May 21st. I'm going to start the offer, so you should see it on the right-hand side now. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. The way the end of the course will work is that you will get all the course materials for 6 months after the course ends. So you'll be able to go through the entire course 4 more times if you wanted to after it ends. And if you stay in Brightliners Land, we would love you to stay in Brightliners Land. If not, if you choose to leave Brightliners Land, then you will have 1 week after the course ends to stay in Brightliners Land and say your goodbyes. Brightline Grit has an investment of, it's a $497 course, but we understand that it's really unusual times. We're taking 50% off for everyone. We've never offered a course for this little, literally never. We have never offered a course for this little, $247. You can also do 2 payments, and notice we stripped out the finance fee here. This is just literally half of that, but rounded off to the nearest dollar. So here for Bright Lifers, if you're a Bright Lifer, then you get the 50% off, but you also get a Bright Lifers discount. So it's an additional $50 off. So it's $197 for you if you're a Bright Lifer, or you can do 2 monthly payments. Now, if you're a Bright Lifer, you don't register right here in the webinar, you need to go to your Bright Lifers website, and there is a banner right here, and this is how you get your Bright Lifers discount. So again, if you're a Bright Lifer and you want to register for the course, you need to go to brightlifers.brightlineeating.com, your Bright Lifers website, and you register using the banner at the top of your Bright Lifers website. Right there. And I also want to say there is a very extreme and generous sliding scale available for this course. So right now, here we are in the webinar. Off to the right, you should see how to register. See that over here on the right? You should be seeing that. If you can't see it, try clicking the 3 red dots or scrolling down or something like that, but it should be over here on the right. Now, when you click to register, you get taken to, if you can't find this, just go to ble.life/grit. ble.life/grit to register. That will take you here to an order form. Okay, you just fill in your billing information, your credit card, or you can pay with PayPal or however you want to pay. Now, if you click down here, you can go to the scholarship page. Okay, this is where the sliding scale is available. These videos are old, relatively old, and I'm leaving them because I stand by them. This is exactly what I feel now and have always felt about both people who want to donate to the scholarship program and people who want to apply for a sliding scale or a scholarship for our courses. If you click apply, you get taken to this website where there's another video. This explains how it all works, and you decide how much you can pay. The sliding scale is up to you. We don't ask for verification of financial hardship in any way. Once you click, the scholarship is yours. You claim it, and we want you to have it with our blessing. On the next page, you choose the course. And then here's the sliding scale options. You can actually go here and just have more payments, but still pay full price. So 5 payments if you want. Or you can activate a sliding scale and use $100 or $150 or $200 or even almost everything from the scholarship fund. You can get it down to 2 payments of $9 at the lowest. And, you know, in the videos, I invite you to really think about the transformation and what it's worth, and then you choose the amount to you. You know, it's your call. Now, there are, in addition to the parts work, there are 2 additional bonuses, I guess we're calling them, but 2 other components to the course. One is science. I had 3 science lectures lined up for this year's family reunion live in San Diego, and you get all 3 of them. So I am putting those together and you can have them. The first one is Ari Whitten and Susan Pierce Thompson present The Science of Sleep and Circadian Rhythm. The second one is me on those happy chemicals and a deep dive on them, how to build them up and foster them in your life. And the third one is Ari Whitten and Susan Pierce Thompson present Breaking Weight Loss Plateaus 101. Super helpful and relevant subject for the people in our community. It's all about the health of your metabolism and how you break a weight loss plateau. And then the next bonus is the final component of the course. This is an entire additional track of the course that I'm creating, and it's a weekly module on staying bright through crisis. So Everett and I are really convinced that we can make this, you could have your brightest 6 weeks ever. And this module, this bonus includes a weekly video module from me. So it's just like the boot camp where you get every week a module of videos on staying bright through crisis. I just shot the first module earlier today and I'm super excited about it. Like, it's going to be super helpful. Now, it takes a reboot resume approach with the food, actions, and support, but each week I cover all 3 of them in combination. So it's really more of a holistic approach to food, actions, and support. And it's going to help you stay bright. I guarantee you come all the way in and sit all the way down, you take my hand and let me guide you, it will help you stay bright. So we want you to join us. The course starts tomorrow with a kickoff call at 3 p.m. Eastern. It will be recorded. You can listen to the recording. If you can't be there live, the whole course is recorded if you can't be there live. And now, my dear ones, it is time for Q&A. Let me go turn the chat thread back on. Boom. And stop sharing my screen and get Everett back up here. And let's see here. So go ahead and start typing your questions into the chat box. We have finished. Oh, Everett left the room. I wonder why. He'll probably be back. I bet that was a mistake. Let me see here. I think I'm missing something. I'm missing the sheet. What happens is my team shows me.
I'm back.
Yeah, what happened? That was funny. What happened?
I just got logged out of the room mysteriously.
Oh, so weird. I lost my live feed. My team creates a special Google Doc basically, and they feed me the questions so they can help me make sure that I answer them all, because I'm pretty fanatical about that. I want to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered. So
Want me to read some? I can see some things in the chat thread.
Yeah,
but
sure.
You can see those too, right?
Yeah, I can. I'm just going
Okay.
into the
Well, Denise Rickard says, I just want to say thank you, all caps. Can't wait to take this course. Yay. Can't wait to teach it to you.
Sweet. Yeah. That is super sweet.
How would a bright lifer stay in bright liners land? Question mark.
We are going to be figuring that out as the course wraps up, basically. So we don't actually have the answer to that yet. Part of the issue is that we are actually transitioning over all of our back end technology. Like we're getting out of Infusionsoft, this system that we've been in forever. And yeah, we need to get out of it. It's like breaking down around us. Basically, it's just not built for a community as big as ours or a movement as big as ours. And so we need to get out of there. And we just need to make sure the technology works as well. Not like in terms of like, if you're a Bright Lifer, you have to have certain tags to be in the community. That system needs to be built. And we're like transitioning it all over right around the time that this course is going to end. Someone was asking, how long is the course? CRF asked, how long does the course last? It's 6 weeks. So it goes until May 21st. 6 weeks till May 21st. But we will find a way for someone who wants to stay in Brightliners land to stay for sure. Okay, Nanette says, she's talking in parts language, Everett. This is great. Listen to Nanette. She says, my manager, who is logical and sequential, is requesting a format of the weekly class presentations and lessons. So can we give her more information about how it's all going to be delivered and unfolding?
There's always a few people who want that, and we don't have that. I mean, I can talk in general that you know, I'm going to be going through this crisis response, and part of it is both you and I are going to be listening to the community and what people are needing and providing what they need. And
I think what we have what she wants though. I think what she wants is like, you already know the day of the week you're releasing your stuff, right?
Right, Saturdays.
Yep, Saturdays. Yep. So every Saturday, Everett's going to be releasing some stuff, and it's probably going to include some combination of like a video lecture where he explains some parts work, not too dissimilar from what he did here, right? Maybe a meditation or some journaling exercises or something like that for you to go deeper with that material. 3 times during the course. So like every other week, there's a witnessed parts work session that you can listen to, right? Once a week, you've got those scheduled. You're doing your coaching calls.
Yep.
Yep. And when are those?
I actually think that's open. There's a question about that right now.
Okay, so we're figuring that out. Yeah, I don't know when mine are going to be either, but they're going to move around maybe to accommodate different time zones and so
That's what I'll be doing too. It'll be we'll space them out well. So we're like both not on the same day.
Yep, and my food bonus is going to be every Thursday. You will get a little packet of videos like the boot camp, like you did on the boot camp, once a week, and you can watch them at your pace, at your leisure. They're short, they're bite-sized, right? And you can watch them over meals or first thing in the morning, or you can binge watch them the day they come out. So there'll be a food component and then the parts work component, and they will they'll basically be separate, except you'll notice when you need to sort of be using them, right? Like you'll need to keep your food bright, so you'll want to watch the food stuff, and then you'll probably need to do some parts work to sort of inform staying in centered self, right, through the week, right?
And I'll be teaching really a specific process for doing that you're going to learn more each week.
Yeah.
So by the end of the 6 weeks, you're going to have a somewhat sophisticated process where you'll be able to do some parts works, but it's going to build week to week.
Yeah. So I hope that helps, Nanette. I hope that helps. Okay, Charlene Marchance has a great question. She says, hi, Susan and Everett. Terrific presentation. I am curious, how did David react to your horribilizer? I ask because my sister's horribilizer triggers my stockpiler, which sparks my shopaholic. 3 weeks after being triggered, I'm now totally prepared to stay in the house another month if necessary. Plus, I have lots of stuff, like a new iron, a diffuser, a rainbow Japanese maple tree, and a ton of fabric. Will the grit course look at how we are activated by the parts of others? Or does it really matter who triggered who, so long as we have the tools to get back to center? Will I learn how to deal with my sister's horribilizer? Usually I just do what she tells me to do to shut her up.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah, that's part of the conversation around parts, is that parts trigger parts. Our parts trigger parts in other people.
Yeah.
The system of parts within you,
and
then the system of parts in your relationship, the system of parts in your family.
Yeah.
Right. In your business, right? And everyone, if you're a systems thinker, as I am, it's very juicy.
Yeah.
To understand all that.
Yeah. So Miriam says, will you have to pay to stay in Brightliners Land like we do in Bright Lifers? So not if you're a Bright Lifer. If you're a Bright Lifer, then no. But let's say that this is the first course you've ever done in Brightline Eating, and then you finish the course. You'll have to like stay hooked in somehow to the Brightline Eating community to stay in Brightliners Land. It will be a community for people who are actively engaged in doing Brightline Eating, like on the mothership. So yeah. D Snow says, thanks, Susan and Everett. Amazing webinar. I'm already registered. Please talk a bit more on how to log into Brightliners Land. Sure. So you already registered for the course. So within 24 hours of registering for the course, you should have gotten a separate email that talked about how to log into Brightliners Land. If you didn't get that, you need to go to support.brightlineeating.com and tell my support team that you didn't get the email on how to register, how to log into Brightliners Land. That email gave you the instructions. It gave you the invitation to log into Brightliners Land. Now, the website for it is community.brightlineeating.com, but and you're going to need to set up a username and password. And it is, for the moment, a separate username and login than the Brightline Grit course login. So the course website is going to be just like all the other course websites for Brightline Eating, and it's going to be run on that same password that you use to log into a bootcamp website, your Bright Lifers website, all the other course websites. That's where the Brightline Grit course materials are going to be for now. Like I said, we're transitioning over all our tech systems. So this is a little bit of duct tape and chicken wire technologically. So that's where the course website will be. Now, Brightliners Land is just a separate login, and you should have gotten an email to log in for that. Carmel says, speaking of happy chemicals, what are your thoughts on marijuana? So, I mean, if you know me, you know that I've been clean and sober for 25 years, right? So I don't smoke marijuana. Do I have thoughts on it in terms of like happy chemicals in the brain? I don't actually. Like, I'm not actually an expert in that. I'm personally more a fan of I'm personally more a fan of seeking whatever, right? Growth, enlightenment, euphoria, whatever. Stone cold sober and high on life. That's my, but I'm a recovering addict, right? And that's my bent. So I will say that I'm not a judger. So I know marijuana is a weird one. Marijuana hits people really differently. It really, really hits people differently. Marijuana always made me paranoid, and like I was always so upset that I smoked. I was like, oh my God, I feel horrible. I hate this. Why did I do this? Oh my gosh, did I just say that, or am I just thinking that? Oh my God, I can't even tell if I'm talking anymore.
That's exactly my experience on pot. I have never liked pot because of it.
So I'm a hot mess on marijuana, but but I don't have any I'm not super up on the neuroscience of like marijuana as a happy chemical facilitator or whatever. I do know that there's all this. I mean, it's all the rage, right? Hemp and CBD and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, okay. Kelly says, will this all be on webinar format, or will there be Zoom meetings? If so, what day? It's neither webinar format nor Zoom meetings. It's going to be pre-recorded videos. The only live part would be the live group coaching calls, but you can send in questions in advance if you can't be there live, and you can listen to the recordings afterwards. And those times and days will move around to try to be helpful to accommodate different people's schedules.
And it's a really effective format. We've been using it for years. Yeah.
Yeah. And Pam says, do you have a schedule of the presentations so we can make sure we're available at those times? Again, it's all recorded. So it's just, we're recording it now, but it's a set of mostly video modules and stuff that you can watch whenever you want. Oh, Helene says, what about the self-pitier? That seems to be one of my parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that to the mix. like, or maybe it's the victim, right?
Yeah,
The victim. Oh, yeah.
totally. Totally.
Yeah. Why me, right? Yeah. Thank you for that. I know there's more.
Yeah,
Maybe
right?
there's as
It is
many as
that
there are
victim.
people.
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Well, and Sharon has a related question. If I don't identify with one or more crisis responses, what could be wrong? Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Looking forward to
Maybe
grit.
nothing. Do you identify with centered self?
Right.
Do you feel like you're calm and clear and,
Yeah, connected,
or is your
courageous.
life very crisis free?
Yeah.
Well, not that anyone's is right now, but some people are being minimally impacted by this.
Oh, yeah. I
They
just
might be retired and at home all the time already, and
finished.
you know, um,
Yeah. Nada says, hello, I'd really like to share this intro video with my sister, and then hopefully she'll be inspired and I can pay for the course for her. Is it possible for me to share this link with her, or is there another link I need to use? Thanks. Yeah, Nada. So what's going to happen is right when this webinar wraps up, within a few hours, you should receive an email that has a replay link in it. And if you don't get that, you really should. But check your email inbox from like all this week. I've been sending out emails almost every day that have a link to a replay page for this webinar. I mean, the previous ones that we did, I don't know, we might put this one on the webinar replay page that we have now. I'm talking gobbledygook, but there's actually 2 webinar replay pages. The short version is, sweetheart, check your email. Keep combing through your email for emails, and there should be a replay link, and then just forward that whole email to your sister and just say, click on this and watch it. Yeah. Gail says, I wondered what you meant near the beginning of this talk about what happens if you leave Brightliners as far as access to this course. I think you said if you choose to leave Brightliners, you only have access to the course material for a week. No. You have access to the course materials for 6 months after the course ends, no matter what. It's the community with the live feed and the posting and the forums and the news group and the recipes and all that. All that is the community, and we're calling it Brightliners Land. And if you don't actively stay involved in Brightline Eating somehow, once this course ends, you won't be in Brightliners Land again after a week. But the course materials, again, are in a separate website for now, and you will have access to that for 6 more months. So I hope that helps. Stacy says, thank you. Is this the Stacy that's on her 3rd time through this live? Stacy says, thank you, Susan and Everett, for these webinars. I got so much out of Sunday's session that I signed up for today's webinar. I'm registered for the course and very excited to do some internal work with my lifelong struggle with food. I was able to download the slides from Sunday's session. The brain PowerPoint slides were not included. Will you be making them available with today's recap? Sure. Yeah, I don't know why. Let me just make a note to make sure that the brain PowerPoints are on there. They should be. Sure. So glad, Stacy. We're excited to have you aboard, and I know Everett and I are tickled by your determination to sit through so many 4-hour masterclasses. Okay. Mess and Edward both wanted to know how to find the scholarship link. So the easy, direct way is scholarship.brightlineeating.com. 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 Mary Jane said, I just tried to get the multiple payments for a Bright Lifer, but it said to go to support at the Bright Lifers site. Okay, so Mary Jane, you're a Bright Lifer. So if you want to sign up for the course with 2 payments, then you're just going to go to your Bright Lifers website, okay? Lifers.brightlineeating.com, and click on the banner up top, okay? There's a 2 payment option there. I think it's like 2 payments of $99. If that's what you want, then you're good. Just go to lifers.brightlineeating.com and click on the banner up top. If you want 5 payments, or a scholarship, then go to scholarship.brightlineeating.com. Scholarship.brightlineeating.com. Okay, someone anonymous said, so excited to learn more about my parts. How much of this will be focused on the food? I'm a teddy bear and would love more support in following the plan. Wondering if this program is for that. Yes. So,
very much.
Yes, very, very much. This will probably really be a game changer for you, because having the strong support with the food, which is what I'm going to provide. You asked how much. A weekly video module like the boot camp, like the module for tomorrow is 11 videos. Okay. So it's very clear, very detailed support around the food. And then you'll have the parts work to do to sort of figure out what's going on inside you when you'll be able to troubleshoot, right? Like if you run up against snags, what's going on? You've got parts in you that are blocking your progress in your food journey. And so the parts work will really help that. Bright Liners Land is also a game changer because it allows for people who need to support each other to lean in and to connect better. Yeah. Chrissy says, I'm so excited and signed up yesterday. How often will we have a chance to have Q&A with you and Everett? I'm planning on digging deep. So Everett and I are each doing coaching calls every week, separately. Mine will be 2 hours. I don't know how long Everett's will be. And yeah, so lots of, I mean, there will be a lot of people in the class, so I don't know that you can get on the call every week, but there will be a lot of supporters in there too. Like there's a whole universe of people who've been really successful now with the methods that Everett and I teach, both Bright Line Eating for the food stuff, parts work, and then the combination of them. And they're in there ready to help and support. So there's a lot of support available in there. Oh, Phaedra has the question that everyone always has, Everett. What type of time commitment would this be on a weekly basis?
What did you say last time? 3 or 4? Again, it all depends.
Yeah.
Right, on how much time you have, whether you want to listen to all the Q&A calls and the witness parts work sessions. The video content in terms of learning sounds like between the two of us might be 60 or 90 minutes per week between the two videos that we do.
Yeah.
And then I, a lot of times there's a workbook with my lesson that's got optional exercises. And if you really want to take this time, and you have time, you could really do a deep dive into this. You could really do a deep dive, and and we'll be suggesting books that you could get if you wanted, if you had time, but they're not essential.
Yeah. Okay, more questions. Let's see here. Denise says, if you're a Bright Lifer, will we have access to the materials beyond the 6 months? So there's no plans for that right now. But the structure of Bright Line Eating is changing in the near future, so that's hard to predict. But right now, I just want to be able to keep my commitments. So everyone will have 6 months after the course ends. Debbie says, hi, Susan. I've been struggling with food addiction my whole life. I joined my first boot camp on 2/17/20, so just recently. My husband passed away 10 months ago. I've tried to get my life on track forever. Since I started the boot camp, I attempted to resume many times, and I just can't seem to get myself off this crazy train. Then, of course, COVID-19 happens. Doesn't help with the crazy I'm living in. Is this the right time for me to be attempting this boot camp and this new program? I know that Bright Line Eating is my answer, just not sure of the timing. Any thoughts?
Yes.
Well, hold on, Everett. I'm not sure. Is she in the boot camp too? That might be a lot.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Debbie, are you in the boot camp too, sweetie? I joined my first boot camp. She says this. Susan, read what she said. I joined my first boot camp on 2/17/20. The issue is I'm living in coronavirus time, and I don't know how long ago that was. 2/17/20.
So that's like 2 months
ago. That's like 2 months ago. She should be coming up to the end of her boot camp pretty soon here. Um, it sounds like you haven't gotten much traction in your boot camp. You might want a fresh start. Your boot camp is winding down. Sweetheart, what I always say in questions like this is look deep inside. When you get calm and centered, when you breathe and come back to your centered self, what does your gut tell you? What's the still small voice inside you say? I love you, sweetie. I'm so sorry for your loss. You probably have some really, really hurt, freaked out parts inside of you that need some love. And I would think doing parts work in conjunction with the food piece really is necessary. So actually, I really would like to see you in this course, because given everything that you described, it's hard for me to imagine how you're just going to get the food handled without doing the parts work to support you in it, really. Those parts inside you, I can hear them. I can hear the pain coming through what you wrote, right? And those are parts, they're hurt parts, and they need support. Christine says, I'm new to Bright Line Eating, and I'm on day 12 of my Bright Line Eating. I have spent money on the cookbook and the book. I have read the book twice, and I keep referencing it. I already feel a sense of integrity, and I feel inspired to continue on my road of self-discovery. I missed the first part of this message because I'm at work. I missed the parts work. I'm a huge sufferer of anxiety and depression with medication. My question is this adorable course when I have 3 little girls at home? I don't know if you mean adorable or affordable, or when I have 3 little girls at home, a husband, and I work full-time. I want to continue my journey, and I'm excited about the scholarship options, and I appreciate your consideration of the time and the position we are all in financially. Another question, is this recorded so we can continue to rewatch anything or review or watch when we can instead of the allotted times when the videos or webinars are posted? It's all recorded, Christine. There's a replay of this webinar for sure. And I understand your situation. I'm a mother of 3 little kids. I have a husband. I work long hours. And even with those things in my life, when I put my mind to something, I find time. I get up half an hour earlier. I listen on the way to here or there. There's ways to work it in. And the other thing about this is that you can get tremendous value from very short slivers of time. It's potent stuff. So,
and you'll be learning some simple techniques that are highly focused on people that are doing Bright Line Eating. I mean, there's a million techniques out there on YouTube, right, for calming yourself, but these are all specifically designed for the challenges we have with in Bright Line Eating.
Yeah.
And you probably haven't been exposed to many of them yet because you're kind of new.
Yeah. Okay. Someone anonymous says, how do you stay safe online with highly vulnerable parts? How do you deal with the hard stuff that comes up? I'm trusting I can stay and manage to care for the scared parts. Hardly anyone is trustworthy with the old bulimia part and obesity that has been my salvation. Geez, even writing this, I realize trust is probably still a too gigantic leap. Such a fantastic afternoon, and appreciate the price help. We are unable to work, so 0 income, but we have time and living savings. Everett, what are your thoughts about that? The kind of...
So, community groups trigger parts. Group dynamics trigger parts. They're like, it's actually useful for teaching parts work because all I have to do is focus on all the triggers that are happening in the group of the people that are there. And so group dynamics are complex, but the nice thing is parts work actually gives you a way of working with them. And a lot of I abstract a lot of what you're dealing with into a part we call the isolator, which is the one that's telling you it's not safe. It's not safe for you to be in that group. You're too vulnerable. And so as you get to know your isolator, and the thing about people in Bright Line Eating is they're kindred spirits. You may not know that yet. Your isolator may not have allowed you to connect with enough of them, but many times when I'm working with someone one-on-one and they're really struggling, we just work on their isolator to get them to the point where they start to reach out and get buddies and get into mastermind groups. And then they're just on. Yeah. It's triggering.
Yeah.
Group stuff.
Yeah. Connie says, I'm a little over halfway through the boot camp. Should I wait until I complete the boot camp and maybe do grit next time? Connie, that's your call. I don't know how much discretionary time you have. You're already a little over halfway through the boot camp, so you have a good sense of how much that's taking from you, right, in terms of time and focus and stuff, whether you're pretty, like that's, you've got what you can handle, or whether you feel like you've got a lot of bandwidth to play with and you could hop into this course too. This course will be offered in the future. People go through crisis all the time with, death and divorce and medical diagnoses and all kinds of things that happen to people. So this course will be around in the future. And I can't tell you exactly when. I have no idea on that. But Bright Lifers will be available to you when your boot camp ends, and that's a beautiful next step. So I don't want you to have fear of missing out here. I want you to just do what really feels right to you. Taking on both courses is a lot right now. And it might be your best move, but it's really up to you. Just sit quiet and listen to deep inside, whether adding another course right now feels like the right move. Susan says, this is the first course I've been able to take because of cost, except for the 14-day challenge. I've been a crystal vaser for over 2 years. I'd like to stay connected at the end of the course, so I'm interested to see if I can afford to do so. Thanks for making this available to people on the low end of things. Susan, scholarship.brightlineeating.com is available and will continue to be available. So write that down, scholarship.brightlineeating.com. We have always had the policy of never turning away anyone who can't afford the registration fee for our programs. We don't always know who they are, but my team scroll through social media and find people and send who are saying I can't afford it, and send them private messages and say, just get a scholarship, just get a scholarship. So welcome, and I'm glad you're in. Jan says, thanks for all this info. Susan, what is the ballpark monthly price of Brightliners Land if you've been a lifer for 4 years? If you've been a lifer for 4 years and you're still a lifer, you're just in, like you're a Bright Lifer. And how will the pricing of a course like Brightline Grit be once we're officially in Brightliners Land? I don't know the answer to all those questions. If you're like, if we offer Brightline Grit again in the future or whatever, so you're just asking me for a crystal ball that I don't have, sweetheart. I just don't have. So yeah, keep in mind, there's always the scholarship site. And when we restructure things in the future to have a monthly membership in Brightliners Land, that will be, we haven't figured all that out yet. So Kelly says, will the coaching sessions be on video? The coaching sessions will be on instant teleseminar, on audio and recorded. How do we download the slides? I don't know if you mean for this webinar. If you mean for this webinar, watch your email and there will be a link to a replay page. You need the email from me eventually saying like, there's a replay page that we set up that has links to the PowerPoint slides below it. So many people have been asking that. Maybe we can send out an email. Certainly by tomorrow, we'll have an email with a link to the replay page with the slides. Mary says, this is my 3rd time of listening. Apparently, I must be a bit slower in figuring things out. I finally related to my part and had answers to all of Everett's questions, including my age, an event, the reason and why, and what will happen to me. But now what? I feel lost as to what I need. I've signed up for the course. Anything to do right now? What should she do with that part? Who knows how old she is?
One of the things that you can always do with your parts is just simply love them.
Yeah.
Simply, hold on to a pillow and just imagine it's the part. Just love your parts. That's actually the most powerful technique and the simplest one is to just love your parts. Because so many so many of us don't, that it's
Yeah.
quite transforming to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that.
And you'll be learning more in the course.
Yeah.
There are other things to do than just love your parts, but that's something I can tell you right now.
Yeah. So a couple people have suggestions for other parts. You got a pen, Everett?
Oh yeah, I saw The Alarmist.
Oh, that's a different one. Okay.
Like that.
Yeah. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Yeah, totally. Leanne asks, is feeling paralyzed to act the burrower? And I'm going to say no, because I have both of those parts. I have
That's
a
Frozen,
strong,
right?
that's a Frozen, that's a deer in the headlights. And I have that
Frozen,
one
yeah.
too. When I
Yeah.
get too emotional on something, sometimes I can't talk, I can't speak, I can't act, I can't anything. Yeah. That's a good one, Leanne.
And then when we have the victim, self-pity, right?
The victim.
Yeah.
And then someone named Private said, how about another part? Abandoned, left out, missing out, invisible.
Yeah. Invisible.
Yeah.
Each of these leads me into like a whole parts work session with a person.
Yeah.
Like all the things I want to ask, you know,
Yeah.
like, oh, I can see like 5 different ways that this might show up.
Diane says, I just registered. So excited. Thank you for this presentation and this fabulous course. You're welcome, Diane. Welcome to Brightline Grit, girlfriend. Awesome. Santina says, The Alarmist came out during the session. I am in a new relationship and it's going very well. I find myself eating after talking to him on the phone. And it seems like there's no good reason for it. The Alarmist came out. Do you think there could be another part I'm not recognizing?
Well, first of all, there is a reason for it. Just to clarify, there is a reason for it, and it's because you're having a feeling.
Yeah.
And I would imagine a new love, it might be fear of abandonment, it might be something in that realm of maybe even it's excitement that you're eating over, and that's something you don't allow yourself to feel. But yeah, but ask that question. Go into your body after that phone call is done. Don't go to the food. Go into your body and just notice. And this is what I teach in the course, right? Notice the sensations in your body. Notice the emotions. And you probably will be able to stop that indulger.
Yeah.
By just feeling your feelings instead.
Yeah. Marquise says, could you clarify how small groups will work in this course? Will we opt in to a small discussion group and be assigned? It'll be more freeform than that. The new platform, Brightliners Land, really facilitates people making connections with each other. And so in Brightline Eating, you'll have access to documents on mastermind groups. And if you're not in one, there will be a lot of people looking to form mastermind groups using our very clear documents that guide you on what that is and how it works. And you'll be able to identify yourself as someone who's looking for that, and then other people will find you and you'll find them. So you'll form your own groups using the technology platform to help you sort of make your intentions known that you're looking for that. Virginia says, can you download the course in iTunes? No. Trisha says, I just registered and I'm excited for this opportunity. I had a year of loss in 2018. My mom, my job, my dad, my stepdad.
Wow.
That leveled me. I had huge healing through parts work combined with some EMDR techniques to get at some childhood abuse parts that were stuck. I know I have food issues. I'm a 10 on the scale and I'm in week 8 of boot camp. The timing of this is perfect and I'm ready to explore more healing and growth. Wow, Trisha, welcome. Welcome, sweetheart. Welcome to Brightline Grit. It's beautiful. I'm so sorry about your 2018. That's just Everett. I could feel Everett and I both like, ooh.
Yeah. Like
pulsing with that grief overload. That's a tsunami of grief overload right there. Nanette says, Susan, are your modules different from the boot camp and from the Reboot Resume course? Every video is brand new. I'm recording these yay as we speak as the course unfolds. Is the content brand new? Well, it's still me saying the same old stuff. Measuring your food. It sounds like maybe you took the boot camp and you took Reboot Resume, so you have a sense that I can create new stuff, right? But so it's different combinations of the same old stuff, you know. The way to get through crisis with your Lines Bright is a serious focus on back to basics, but you know, common sense is just not that common, right? Like the basics are not very basic for people. Like, in the last 24 hours, have you written down everything you were going to eat and did you commit it live on the phone to somebody? And have you eaten only in exactly that? Like if we just get down to basics and we just survey 1,000 people in Brightline Eating, you know, I bet fewer than 100 people did that in the last 24 hours, right? So we're going to get back to basics, but it's all the videos are new. So yeah. Okay. So Elizabeth says, so I go into land, but I cannot find news feed or videos. I do find the members and the map, and I did write in all of my info. I just can't find the videos to help me manage navigation. Love these ideas. Thank you. Okay. So,
I know where they are.
Yeah.
They're on the home page for Brightline Grit.
Yeah.
There's a welcome video from Susan and I. And then beneath them, I think there are 4 videos that are little training videos for the community.
Yeah.
So it's actually on the website.
What he's talking about, Elizabeth, is there's 2 sites. There's Brightliners Land, which is what you're describing. And Everett's talking about the course website. The course website is your usual Brightline Eating login for all the other Brightline Eating courses. And you need to go to that course website, and then there's a welcome video, and then the training videos are down below. Now I'm going to say one other thing, Elizabeth, and I hope we're not confusing you hopelessly. Back in Brightliners Land where you're talking about, you said you found the members and the map. I believe what you need to click on is, okay, community.brightlineeating.com. I'm just going there real quickly. So it says communities and it says people. If you found the map, that was people. If you click on communities, that gives you Brightline Grit as a big option, and you're going to click on that. Now, if you're on your phone, I'd have to look on my phone and tell you exactly. Maybe it's the 3 dots. I don't know. But there are office hours that my team is holding to help you acclimate to it. And yeah, just keep asking, sweetheart. How do we get her support, Everett? I mean, if she's not even in there.
Well, it's what I heard was she was looking for those training videos that.
Yeah.
So that's why I just said go to the website itself.
Yeah, it's on the Brightline Grit website. Yeah. Catherine says, my Bright Lifers membership renewal is coming up. How do I find the sliding scale based on the number of years I have been a lifer? I'm the one who's lost my job due to the crisis. I am one who has lost my job due to the crisis. And so I need to know the total amount I will need to have on hand this month. So Catherine, if you, if this is your first annual renewal, then the monthly membership is going from $49 down to $39 for you. If you already renewed once and this is your next monthly renewal, it's going down to $29 a month. And the system will handle that. It'll go down automatically. And there's a scholarship website. So if you need more assistance than that, go to scholarship.brightlineeating.com when your renewal is due and get more assistance than that. Scholarship.brightlineeating.com. Everett, Maya's got a question for you. She says, I really enjoyed and got so much out of Brightline Freedom. This sounds so similar. How is it different?
Well, so this is going to be a really gentle introduction to parts work, but I'm integrating core emotion work into it. So I'm actually teaching this in a new way that I think is going to be even more useful for Brightline eaters. So I think you are, well, first of all, if nothing was different, it would probably be really useful, because the thing, when you come back to these ideas and concepts over and over, you just understand them more deeply. Um, but there is going to be a new, Bright Line Freedom was 2 years ago, and I've had a lot of evolution in my own thinking and ways that I'm doing things. So that's going to show up in these lectures. Yeah, and you'll be part of the group. That's the thing with doing a course, right? You'll be part of a group and part of that energy. And yes, you could go back to your notes and like learn it all, review it, but will you, or do you? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lois said, "Can one join Bright Lifers at any time?" So, no, actually, the pathway into Bright Lifers happens at the end of our courses. In particular, the boot camp and Reboot Resume. And now at the end of this course, if you've done a boot camp, you'll be eligible to join Bright Lifers at the end of this course, Brightline Grit. But you can't just join Bright Lifers anytime. You need to have done a boot camp, and you need to do it at the end of your course. Christine says, "I work a combination of nights and days." That rotating shift work is so hard. And my emotions can roller coaster due to 25 plus hours without sleep. Can this parts therapy help to center and control the emotions that are being interfered with from sleep deprivation? And how on earth do you eat and plan meals with days as long as mine can be? Yep.
So we're going to be giving you tools and techniques for doing that, right? In terms of like the reality of your life, that's something that we don't have any control over. But you may learn about, sometimes people that are caretakers that are killing themselves as caretakers, they have a caretaking part that's running the show that they need to unblend from. They need to actually include themselves in their own self-care and their caretaking, and they're not doing that. So I don't know that you're in that position, but you might be, or you're just on the front lines right now, right? So you're just
totally
in the front lines, right? So
Everett, I think you need to move your mic away from your beard. It's like rubbing against your beard. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So yeah, Christine, Everett's so right on about that. So there's the parts work will help. And remember also, Ari Witten's webinar with me on sleep and circadian rhythm will really help. He will be really knowledgeable about the science of shift work and have some really good strategies for you. So keep that in mind. And then my team and I, when you're in the course, can really help you on planning your meals around that shift work. So basically, I've done this program flying to Australia and back regularly. So like 41 hours of traveling, right? It's like, well, I mean, and then arriving 16 hours later than whatever, right? Like notions of breakfast, lunch, and dinner just break down under certain circumstances, and yours is one of them. So what you basically do is, and the nuances kind of matter, but you'll get into a rhythm. It has to do with just you eat every 4 to 6 hours. You eat every 4 to 6 hours. You give your body the fuel you need. You eat every 4 to 6 hours that you're going to be awake. Prepping and planning still applies. It totally does. So Denise mentions that the replay page doesn't have all the slides on them, and the tech team has been notified and they're looking into it, and we can get all those uploaded. Paige says, if you're finishing boot camp now and intend to join Bright Lifers, is it possible to join and then get the Bright Lifers discount on the course? Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on the timing on that. I know my team is really forgiving. So if you join and then join Bright Lifers and then so what you want to do is go to support.brightlineeating.com and say, hey, I just joined Bright Lifers and I joined this course a week ago. Can you give me that $50 back? They'd be like, sure. So support.brightlineeating.com. Donna says, without a list of parts I don't remember, but is there a saboteur? So the saboteur is like the food indulger, right? But it's a certain kind of seduction, like which indulger would that be, Everett? The one that's whispering in in
Yeah,
your
the
ear, and
rational
the
seducer. Yeah,
rationalizing seductress or whatever, seducer.
yeah.
Um, okay, Marquise, who was asking about small groups earlier, said, glad to hear it. I've had trouble finding a mastermind group. I'm entering my second year as a lifer. Yeah, totally, Marquise. And there's some people in Bright Liners Land you want to get to know. James Hefke is one, and Stefan Pulio is another, and Tony Wade is another. I'm assuming from your name that you're male. I don't know if that's true or not. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, the new platform will have a very easy way to find mastermind groups. So that will really help. I think we're winding down. Diane has a great question, Everett, for you. Can this course help with forgiveness?
Yeah. Right. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is deciding to not be angry at someone anymore. That was a definition that came out of that Mr. Rogers movie. Like, forgiveness is deciding not to be. He was explaining it to children, and I heard it for the first time. I was like, wow, that is what forgiveness is. Like, deciding to not be angry at someone for something anymore. And so even though we don't, in IFS, there's a lot of healing techniques, and forgiveness isn't one of them, which is kind of interesting because it's like such a big healing technique. Forgiveness really happens in the process of parts work, right? So, but it's not an explicit technique that we use. But there's so many orientations towards forgiveness out there. We don't need to include it.
Yeah. All right. I think we're good, everyone. I think we're good. I'm just loving you all so much. This is the end of the last one, Everett.
Oh my God, what an intense week this was.
Yeah.
Wow.
Totally.
Wow.
Yep. Love you all so much. Thank you for being here with us. It's really a privilege and a treat.
That one of the things I just feel called to say, Susan, is just this combination of Bright Line Eating, the way you teach it and have created it, and parts work, right? It's this magical thing when you do both of them. And we're doing it in one course.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
for the first time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, my dears. We're going to sign off and just say we love you. I'm doing another Facebook Live tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern if you want to join me. The course starts tomorrow. So you'll get, another email from me in the morning with links and reminders and so forth. And I'm sure another email, but before the end of the day. And, you can refer, things are scary right now, and the reports are that they're going to get scarier, and just know that you can use that BFF, the breath, come back to breathe, feel your body, feel your feet, feel connected to each other and to the earth. And when your parts get active, remember they're just trying to help, and get curious. Don't shame, get curious. And, we're just busy here at Bright Line Eating, creating as much support as we can for you. And we just love you. We just are tickled to be on this journey with you through everything that's happening. It's unusual times.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that you get the support that you need.
Yeah.
And that you treat yourself gently. Yeah. It's such an extraordinary crisis. Is such...
There's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
If we can stay in ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So many possible gifts can come out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we love you, and we're going to sign off.
All right.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.